Hello, and welcome to the Snoozy Scientist. I'm really glad you made it here tonight. Wherever you are on this planet, this little pocket of quiet was made just for you. A calm space where science and wonder can sit side by side, gently putting you to sleep. Tonight, we're going to drift slowly into one of Earth's most haunting and beautiful stories, a story about endings and new beginnings. Because 66 million years ago, the world ended. An asteroid 6 miles wide struck the Earth with the force of billions of bombs. Forests caught fire, oceans boiled, ash and darkness covered the skies, and in what felt like the blink of an eye, 3 out of every 4 living things were gone. The dinosaurs, rulers of Earth for more than 160 million years, were gone forever. But what happens to a planet after 75% of life is erased? When the ground is scorched, the seas are poisoned, and the skies are dark? How does life begin again? From the shadows of devastation, tiny survivors emerged. Shrew-like mammals, no larger than your hand, scurried in the undergrowth. Burrowers rose from the soil. Fragile forests began to rise again from blackened ground. And slowly, in that silence where dinosaurs once roared, Earth was reborn. This new chapter is called the Cenozoic. Scientists call it the Age of Mammals. But it was more than that. What followed is a forgotten epic, a world of creatures more bizarre than many dinosaurs, yet rarely remembered. Birds taller than men that stalked their prey like predators on 2 legs. Whales that once walked on land before plunging back into the seas. Mammals that grew even larger than elephants, and horned beasts so immense they may have inspired the myths of unicorns. Some of these forgotten giants even survived long enough to meet the first humans. So who ruled the Earth after the dinosaurs were gone? Why don't we remember them as we do T-Rex? And what do their fates tell us about our own survival? Tonight, we'll wander through 66 million years of forgotten Earth, from the first fragile dawn of the Cenozoic, through ages of terror birds, saber-toothed hunters, and woolly titans, until the moment our ancestors stepped into their world. If you're already enjoying this calm space, it would mean so much if you gave this video a gentle like, maybe even subscribed, if you'd like more sleepy science stories like this. And if you feel comfortable sharing, let me know in the comments. Where are you tuning in from tonight, and what time is it there? It's always a joy to see how far across the world these gentle science stories travel. So now take a slow breath, let your shoulders soften, and let's begin our journey into the forgotten age after the dinosaurs. The silence after the great impact did not last forever. Slowly, in the shadows of destruction, Earth began to stir again. The age of dinosaurs had ended, but the world was not empty. It was fragile, scorched, and uncertain, yet still alive. The very first dawn of the Cenozoic was beginning, an age that would last from 66 million years ago to our own day. In these earliest moments during what scientists call the Paleocene epoch, life tiptoed back onto the stage. The planet was still reeling from its wounds. Vast forests had burned to ash, and the seas had swallowed entire coastlines, but green shoots now pushed through blackened soil. Ferns, hardy and unyielding, were often the first to appear. Where their fronds spread, they softened the scarred ground, laying the foundation for forests to return. Trees followed, filling the air with green once more, their canopies weaving together to shade the earth below. The climate during this recovery was hot and heavy, a greenhouse world that wrapped itself in warmth. There were no great ice caps at the poles, and even regions that today are frozen in snow were covered in thick forests. It was a time when heat lingered in every corner, encouraging plants to spread quickly and reclaim the land. Rain fell often, feeding rivers and swamps that cut across the recovering continents. In this lush but unsettled world, mammals remained small, Cautious and quiet, these survivors had endured the extinction by hiding in burrows, scurrying in the dark, and waiting for danger to pass. Now, with the dinosaurs gone, the land was open, but the memory of predators still shaped their behavior. Many stayed nocturnal, venturing out under the cover of night, their tiny bodies darting through the underbrush in search of insects, seeds, or fallen fruit. They were shrew-like, no larger than a modern rat, with sharp noses and quick claws. Some were early primates, clinging to branches with grasping fingers and wide eyes suited for dim light. Others were the first hoofed mammals, still small, but beginning to adapt to the forests around them. Every adaptation was an experiment. Nature was testing new possibilities, and each small step would ripple forward into the future. The absence of dinosaurs had left countless ecological niches empty. Where once enormous plant eaters had stripped branches bare, only insects and tiny mammals now fed. Where once giant predators stalked herds across plains, silence now lingered. Into that silence, opportunities waited. Mammals began to fill these roles slowly, each generation adapting a little more, reaching a little further. They were fragile, but their very smallness was an advantage in a world that was still unpredictable. Above them, birds also thrived. Many were small, flitting through branches or skimming along rivers, but some were already beginning to explore new forms, larger and more daring than their ancestors. Their songs returned sound to the forests that had been hushed by catastrophe. Together with the rustle of leaves and the trickle of rivers, they marked the beginning of a new soundtrack for Earth. Though forests were thick and the air was hot, danger had not vanished. Reptiles still lingered, smaller cousins of the giants that had ruled before. Crocodiles haunted rivers, their eyes just above the waterline, waiting for a chance to strike. Turtles, lizards, and snakes moved quietly among the undergrowth. But none would ever dominate the planet as their relatives once had. The balance of power was shifting, and mammals, though still modest in form, were preparing to grow into it. The landscapes themselves were restless. Continents were moving, carried slowly by the currents beneath Earth's crust. What is now India was racing toward Asia, a collision that would eventually push up the mighty Himalayas. North America, Europe, and Asia were closer than they are today, connected by land bridges that allowed species to wander across them. South America, however, remained isolated, a hidden laboratory where evolution would follow its own path. The world was being reshaped, and with it the creatures that lived upon it. The Paleocene epoch was a quiet beginning, marked less by great drama than by patient persistence. Life was fragile, but it was also determined. Each fern that rose from ash, each tiny mammal that scurried through the dark, each forest that pushed back against the silence, carried Earth one step further from destruction. The stage was being set for something extraordinary, for in the millions of years to come, these small survivors would grow into giants, and as the forests thickened and the mammals learned to climb higher, dig deeper, and roam further, the story of the Cenozoic unfolded, moving steadily toward the moment when mammals would no longer need to hide. The quiet forests of the Paleocene soon filled with new sounds. In the shadows where small survivors had once clung to secrecy, mammals began to grow bolder. They were no longer only shrew-like creatures darting under ferns. With time, new shapes appeared, subtle at first, but carrying the promise of entire lineages that would one day dominate Earth. This was the moment when mammals began to break free. Ungulates were among the first to step forward into the vacant world. These were the hoofed mammals, distant ancestors of horses, cattle, and deer. At first, they were modest in size, no larger than a fox, and they padded through the thick undergrowth on soft feet that would later harden into hooves. Some browsed on leaves, stretching upward to pull down tender branches, while others bent low to nibble at shoots near the forest floor. Their teeth began to adapt, sharpening and flattening in different ways to match their diets. What had once been simple molars for crushing insects or seeds were slowly reshaped into grinding surfaces made for plants. Each adaptation was an experiment, guided by the demands of hunger and the opportunities left behind by the vanished giants. Rodents appeared alongside them, quick and restless, with sharp incisors that never stopped growing. This single feature gave them an incredible advantage, for they could gnaw through almost anything. Big seeds, nuts, bark, and even tough stems became food. Their small bodies multiplied quickly, filling forests, burrows, and riverbanks. Where other animals faltered, rodents thrived, always ready to expand into new spaces. Their resilience would carry them forward through every twist of the Cenozoic, shaping entire ecosystems as they went. High in the branches, primates began their story. These early relatives of ours were still small, clinging with long fingers and gripping with flexible feet. Large eyes faced forward, helping them judge distances as they leapt from branch to branch. Their diets were mixed, taking fruits, insects, and leaves, and their curiosity drew them higher into the canopy. In this safety above the ground, they began to develop more complex social lives, traveling in groups and watching one another with growing awareness. These first primates were not yet like us, but they carried the seeds of intelligence that would one day define humanity. The small size of these mammals was not a weakness, but a shield against instability. The climate during the Paleocene could swing sharply, with bursts of heat and shifting rainfall patterns. A giant beast tied to a narrow diet might struggle to survive, but a small mammal, quick to reproduce and capable of eating many things, could bend without breaking. Their very fragility gave them strength, and with each generation, new experiments in form and function emerged. Some grew longer legs for speed, others developed stronger jaws for chewing plants, while still others sharpened their senses for hunting insects in the dark. Every trait was tested by the living world. The ones that worked were passed on, and over countless years, those small adjustments stacked together to create entirely new families. It was not a slow march, but a series of rapid bursts, like sparks flying from a fire. Evolution seemed to accelerate, sending mammals outward into every available niche. Forests that had once been quiet now rustled with a variety of footsteps. On the ground, ungulates moved cautiously in small herds, their heads dipping to feed among the ferns. In the trees above, primates called softly to one another as they leapt through branches. Beneath the soil, rodents dug tunnels that aerated the earth and spread seeds, helping forests recover even faster. Together, these creatures were knitting ecosystems back together, filling roles that had been empty since the fall of the dinosaurs. The world was still young in this new age, but the outlines of the future were beginning to appear. Each mammal carried within it the possibility of something greater, of forms that would one day tower above the land or dive into the depths of the sea. For now, they remained modest in size, cautious and quick, but the stage was being set. The age of mammals was no longer only a whisper in the undergrowth. It was rising into the trees, spreading across the plains, and waiting for its giants to come. And as the forests thickened and the herds grew, another kind of ruler was stirring in the shadows, one that would not roar like a dinosaur, but instead strike with speed and precision, changing the balance of power in this forgotten world. As mammals were testing new forms in the forests and undergrowth, another lineage of survivors was rising into unexpected power. These were not reptiles or small scurrying creatures, but birds. For millions of years after the asteroid strike, birds filled roles that had once belonged to toothy predators. Nowhere was this more dramatic than in South America, a continent cut off from the rest of the world, where evolution took its own bold experiments. Here the rulers of the land were not cats or wolves, but enormous flightless hunters known as forest racids, or more simply, the terror birds. They stood taller than a grown human, some reaching heights of nearly 10 feet. Their wings had withered to stubs, but their legs were long and muscular, built for running at remarkable speeds. With each stride, they could cover ground in a blur, closing the gap between themselves and their prey. Their heads were massive, with hooked beaks that curved like scythes. Those beaks were not made for delicate feeding, but for crushing bone, tearing flesh, and striking with the force of a hammer. In the isolation of South America, terror birds became the top predators. They filled the ecological throne that elsewhere might have been taken by large cats or hyenas. Fossil trackways show their long strides across ancient riverbanks, and scattered bones suggest their powerful strikes shattered the skeletons of the animals they hunted. Unlike the dinosaurs that had once chased prey in packs, these birds seem to have relied on ambush and speed. They would stalk quietly through tall grasses or along the edges of woodlands, then lunge forward with explosive power. One blow from the beak could stun or kill, followed by sharp tearing strikes that finished the hunt. For millions of years they ruled unchallenged, their dominance stretching across epochs. Smaller mammals lived in fear of their shadows, and even larger plant eaters had to remain alert. Rodents, early hoofed mammals, and other ground dwellers were all vulnerable, while primates stayed high in the trees, out of reach. The fossils of their prey are sometimes found alongside their remains, silent evidence of the deadly balance that shaped these ecosystems. South America's separation from other continents gave these birds free rein. Without large carnivorous mammals to compete with them, the terror birds diversified. Some grew to gigantic sizes, towering over everything else, while others remained smaller, more agile, darting through dense vegetation in search of quick meals. Each species adapted to a slightly different niche, from forest edge hunter to open plains runner. This variety made them one of the most successful predatory groups of their age. The landscape itself suited them well. The continent was a patchwork of open grasslands, forests, and wetlands. Herds of grazing mammals began to appear, offering abundant food. Rivers wound through valleys, carrying nutrients and drawing animals to their banks. In this world, terror birds thrived, standing tall and unchallenged in their dominion. The fossil record provides striking glimpses of their power. Skulls nearly 2 feet long with sharp, curved beaks, leg bones thick and strong, built for speed and impact. Some skeletons show healed fractures, hinting at the brutal clashes of predators who may have fought each other as fiercely as they hunted. Even the preserved footprints, wide and deep in the stone, speak of their size and weight, each print a frozen step of a predator in motion. For nearly 60 million years after the asteroid, they held their ground as apex hunters of the southern continent. Their story is one of opportunity and dominance, a reminder that the fall of the dinosaurs did not leave the world quiet for long. In one corner of Earth, the thunder of predators returned, not with jaws full of teeth, but with beaks sharper than knives and legs that could chase down almost anything that dared to run. And while South America was shaped by the shadows of these towering birds, the oceans of the world were undergoing their own transformation, as creatures that had once walked on land were beginning to test the waters, setting the stage for a new kind of giant to rise. While South America's plains echoed with the thunder of giant birds chasing prey, another transformation was beginning far from the forests and grasslands. It unfolded in the oceans, where the surface glittered with sunlight and the depths remained dark and silent. Into these waters, a surprising group of creatures ventured, not fish or reptiles, but mammals that had once walked firmly on land. In time, they would become the largest animals ever to live. But their story began humbly, with small steps at the water's edge. Among the first of these pioneers was a creature known as Pakicetus. To look at it, you might not guess it was related to whales at all. It had legs built for walking, a long, narrow skull, and teeth that could snap at fish or other small prey. Yet it lingered along riverbanks and shallow coastal waters, slipping into streams in search of food. Fossils of Pakicetus found in what is now Pakistan reveal an animal caught between two worlds, still tied to the land, but already drawn to the promise of the sea. From such beginnings came more daring forms, like Ambulocetus, sometimes called the walking whale. It was larger, with short, powerful legs and webbed feet. Its body was better suited for swimming, though it could still haul itself awkwardly onto land. Ambulocetus would have looked something like a crocodile mixed with a wolf, lunging at prey from the water's edge, using its strong jaws to drag animals down. Its name tells the story clearly. A whale that still walked, but whose future was being written in waves and currents. As generations passed, these early mammals grew more comfortable in the water. Their nostrils shifted slowly back along the skull, making breathing at the surface easier. Their limbs narrowed and stretched into paddles, trading speed on land for grace in the sea. Their bodies became more streamlined, better shaped to cut through water. Every change brought them closer to a life entirely at sea, far from the forests where their ancestors had hidden after the extinction. Then came creatures like Basilosaurus, a giant that stretched as long as a bus. Despite its name, which means king lizard, it was no reptile, but a fully marine mammal. Basilosaurus had an elongated body, like a serpent, twisting through the water with incredible power. Its jaws were lined with sharp teeth capable of tearing into fish and even smaller whales. Fossil evidence suggests it was one of the first true giants of the ocean, a hunter that ruled seas, once dominated by reptiles in ages past. Unlike Pakicetus or Ambulocetus, Basilosaurus could not return to land. Its small hind limbs, reduced almost to stubs, served no purpose for walking. It was bound to the ocean forever, the first of many titans to come. The oceans during this time were alive with opportunity. Warm climates fostered an abundance of fish, squid, and other marine life. Coral reefs expanded, teeming with color and movement. New predators filled the deep, from sharks growing larger than before to these emerging whales. Each ecosystem adjusted as mammals took their place alongside older ocean dwellers. Where once giant reptiles like mosasaurs had ruled, now these newcomers carved out dominion. It is striking to imagine how quickly this transformation unfolded in the scale of deep time. In only a handful of million years, descendants of small hoofed mammals had left behind the land to become streamlined hunters of the sea. Their ears adapted to hear underwater vibrations, their lungs grew capable of holding vast reserves of air, and their muscles powered long dives into the depths. The blueprint of modern whales was already forming, a path that would eventually lead to species capable of crossing entire oceans, from singing humpbacks to the immense blue whale. The story of these first whales shows how life never remains fixed. Even in a world still recovering from catastrophe, evolution found room for daring experiments. Where rivers met coasts, mammals slipped into water for food. Generation after generation, they ventured further until the ocean itself became their home. And while they spread through seas across the globe, on land other giants were beginning to stir, rising tall among the trees and reshaping entire landscapes in silence and strength. While the seas filled with new hunters and serpentine giants like Basilosaurus, the land was undergoing its own transformation. Forests and grasslands stretched across vast continents, and in these spaces, mammals were beginning to experiment with size. From small beginnings, some lineages pushed upward and outward, growing taller, heavier, and more commanding with each generation. Out of this evolutionary reach came one of the most extraordinary creatures Earth has ever produced, a forgotten titan whose very presence reshaped the landscapes it wandered. This was Indricotherium, also known as Paraceratherium, the largest land mammal known to science. It lived during the Oligocene epoch, roughly 30 million years ago, and stood taller than any living elephant. At its shoulder, it may have reached more than 16 feet, and from head to tail it stretched close to 30 feet in length. To imagine such a creature is to imagine a living skyscraper of bone and muscle moving with slow, deliberate steps across the plains of Asia. Indricotherium was a relative of modern rhinoceroses, though it lacked the horns that define its descendants. Instead, its skull was elongated, with a large mouth suited to stripping leaves from high branches. Its neck stretched long and powerful, allowing it to reach the tops of trees, like a mammalian counterpart to the sauropod dinosaurs that had vanished millions of years before. Fossil evidence shows that its teeth were designed for browsing, grinding down tough foliage, bark, and the fibrous leaves of towering plants. With each meal, it could shape the very forests it lived in, clearing branches and opening light to the understory below. The fossils of this giant have been found across Asia, from Mongolia to Kazakhstan, painting a picture of a wide-ranging herbivore. Its bones are enormous, some limb fragments so heavy that even a few pieces can weigh as much as an entire human. Paleontologists reconstructing its skeletons have marveled at the scale. Rib cages broad enough for a person to stand inside, legs like massive pillars to support the bulk above, and vertebrae that hint at the strength required to lift its long neck. Every fossil discovery tells of a creature that dwarfed almost everything around it. Yet for all its size, Indricotherium was not a predator. It was a gentle browser, relying on its immense height to reach food others could not. Herds of these giants would have shaped entire ecosystems, stripping trees, clearing pathways, and creating openings in forests where new plants could take root. Smaller animals would have moved in their wake, feeding on fallen branches or new shoots exposed by their browsing. Like elephants today, Indricotherium acted as an ecosystem engineer, altering its environment simply through the act of living. The climate during the Oligocene was cooler than the steaming heat of the Paleocene and Eocene, yet still warm enough to support expansive forests and open woodlands. In these shifting environments, Indricotherium found its niche, towering above other mammals. Its size alone offered protection, for few predators would dare to challenge something so large. Even so, its life was not without struggle. Such giants required enormous amounts of food each day, and droughts or shifts in vegetation would have placed great pressure on them. Fossil evidence suggests they roamed widely, following the seasonal growth of plants across great distances. To encounter such a creature, had humans ever walked beside it, would have been awe-inspiring. Imagine standing on a grassy plain, looking upward as a beast twice the height of a giraffe reached effortlessly into the canopy. Its footsteps would have shaken the ground, slow and steady, its silhouette breaking the horizon like a moving piece of landscape. Unlike the predators that inspire fear, Indricotherium inspires wonder, a reminder of how vast life can become when conditions allow. The existence of Indricotherium also highlights one of the great patterns of evolution. With the dinosaurs gone, mammals expanded into roles once held by those reptilian titans. In the sea, whales took the place of marine reptiles. On land, Indricotherium rose as the counterpart of sauropods, giant herbivores that shaped forests by reaching the highest branches. The story of the Cenozoic is not just one of survival, but of echoes, where life revisits ideas from the past in new forms, filling old roles with fresh designs. For tens of millions of years, Indricotherium and its relatives dominated Asia, gentle giants that needed no horns, no claws, only their size and reach. They remain among the most impressive mammals ever to walk the earth, yet their story is little remembered outside the halls of paleontology. When their time ended, the land did not stay quiet. New landscapes were opening, grasslands spreading wider than before, and with them came a new stage for grazers and the predators that followed them. As the giants of the Oligocene browsed at the tops of trees, the climate of Earth was beginning to shift again. The greenhouse warmth that had dominated earlier ages slowly cooled, rainfall patterns changed, and the great forests that once stretched endlessly began to thin. In their place, new landscapes opened, vast and windswept, covered not by towering trees, but by endless seas of grass. These grasslands spread across continents, transforming the face of the earth and setting the stage for new creatures to evolve. Grasses were not entirely new, but until this time they had lived quietly in the shadow of forests. With cooler and drier conditions, they found their moment to flourish. They spread quickly, forming carpets that could withstand drought and fire. Unlike many plants, grasses stored their nutrients at their base rather than in leaves or stems. This made them remarkably resilient, able to survive grazing or burning and grow back again. Over time, prairies, savannas, and steppes stretched for miles, creating some of the richest habitats the planet had ever known. For animals, these open spaces were both opportunity and challenge. Forest dwellers had once relied on the cover of trees for protection, but now the horizon offered little shelter. Those who adapted to the grasslands would thrive, while others faded into memory. Among the most successful were the hoofed mammals, especially horses, antelope, and bison, whose bodies transformed to meet the demands of this new world. Early horses were still small compared to the powerful animals we know today. They had multiple toes and browsed on soft leaves, but as the grasslands spread, they changed. Over generations, their teeth became stronger, able to grind the tough silica-rich blades of grass. Their legs lengthened, their bodies grew faster and more agile, and their toes fused into a single strong hoof that struck the ground with speed. By running swiftly across open plains, they could outpace predators and cover the great distances needed to find food and water. Antelope followed a similar path, built for endurance and speed. Herds gathered on the savannas, their eyes wide and alert, their bodies honed for sudden bursts of flight when danger approached. Bison, too, became symbols of the open grasslands, moving in immense herds that grazed down fields before wandering on to the next. Each step of their evolution was shaped by the vastness of their environment, where survival meant seeing far, running fast, and living always on the move. But wherever prey flourishes, predators follow. The grasslands became a stage for an ancient arms race, a back and forth of adaptation between hunter and hunted. Carnivores developed sharper teeth, stronger jaws, and bodies designed for sprinting pursuit. Some cats grew long legs and powerful muscles for chasing across the plains, while packs of canid ancestors learned to coordinate, their endurance allowing them to track prey until it tired. Every improvement in speed or awareness among prey was met with a response from predators, weaving together a balance of life that defined these open spaces. The grasslands themselves shaped behavior as much as they shaped bodies. Animals that once lived alone in the cover of forests now gathered in groups. Herds offered safety, with many eyes scanning the horizon for threats. Within these herds, social bonds grew stronger, guiding migrations that could stretch for hundreds of miles. The rhythm of life was tied to the seasons, to the growth of grasses, and to the water that flowed through rivers and lakes. Fossilized trackways reveal these movements, the impressions of countless hooves pressed into ancient mud, recording the passage of herds that moved like living tides across the earth. The spread of grasslands also had a profound effect on the land itself. Grazing herds kept the grasses trimmed, which encouraged new growth, while predators ensured that populations did not grow unchecked. Fires sparked by lightning cleared away old vegetation, allowing fresh shoots to rise. Together, these cycles created ecosystems that were both dynamic and resilient, capable of supporting vast numbers of animals. It was a world of constant motion, where survival belonged to those who could adapt to the openness of the plains. And while these landscapes transformed life on land, other corners of the earth were seeing very different dramas unfold. In some regions, ancient predators that were neither cats nor dogs still held power, their strange forms a reminder of an earlier age. As the grasslands thrived, these shadowy hunters tested their place in a world that was rapidly leaving them behind. As herds of horses, antelope, and bison spread across the new grasslands, their presence invited danger. Open plains were not only the stage for grazers, but also for the hunters that pursued them. Yet in this time, before lions roared or wolves howled, the role of top predator belonged to stranger creatures, now mostly forgotten. These were the hyaenodons and creodonts, early mammalian carnivores that once dominated the dawn of the Cenozoic. Creodonts were among the first true mammalian hunters to rise after the fall of the dinosaurs. They appeared not long after the Paleocene and quickly spread across much of the world. Their bodies varied widely, some small and fox-like, others massive and bear-like, but all shared sharp, shearing teeth designed for cutting flesh. Unlike the cats and dogs that would one day replace them, creodonts were built on a different blueprint. Their skulls and jaws hinged in ways that gave them an extraordinary bite force. Some had long, low bodies with strong legs, suggesting ambush hunting, while others were more adapted to running, chasing prey across open ground. For millions of years, they were the undisputed masters of the hunt. Among their ranks, hyaenodons stood out as some of the largest and most fearsome. Despite their name, they were not related to modern hyenas, but their skulls stretched long and narrow, filled with sharp teeth that could slice through bone. Some species grew to the size of a modern lion, while the largest reached even larger proportions, stalking prey with a combination of endurance and crushing power. Their jaws could clamp down with enough strength to shatter the skeletons of smaller animals, leaving little chance of escape once caught. In the forests and plains of early Cenozoic Earth, these predators thrived. Fossils show their remains scattered from Asia to North America, evidence of their wide success. They hunted the ungulates that grazed in herds, the rodents that scurried through the grass, and even other predators when territories overlapped. Their dominance lasted for tens of millions of years, shaping ecosystems where prey and predator were locked in a constant struggle for survival. The way these hunters lived can still be glimpsed through their fossils. Their long, heavy jaws and blade-like teeth reveal a diet focused on tearing meat rather than crushing. Some skeletons show adaptations for speed, with elongated limbs for pursuit, while others were more stocky, relying on sudden ambush. Trackways and bone beds suggest that some may have hunted alone, while others perhaps scavenged in groups. They were versatile and effective, taking advantage of the wide range of prey that flourished in the new grasslands. But time has a way of reshaping even the most successful lineages. As climates continued to change and ecosystems evolved, creodonts and hyenodonts began to falter. Their teeth, once so effective, were highly specialized and less adaptable to new prey or shifting diets. Meanwhile, a new group of carnivores, the ancestors of modern cats, dogs, and bears, were rising in the background. These newcomers had more flexible jaws, different tooth structures, and in many cases more efficient body plans for running and endurance. Over time, they outcompeted the older hunters, pushing them into smaller niches until finally they disappeared. By the Miocene epoch, around 20 million years ago, most creodonts were gone. Their time as the top predators of Earth had ended, leaving the stage open for the carnivores that are more familiar to us today. Yet their shadow lingers in the fossil record, a reminder that the Cenozoic was shaped not only by the animals we still know, but also by strange and powerful creatures whose dominance was once absolute. The disappearance of these predators did not leave the plains empty. In South America, cut off from the rest of the world, a very different set of animals was rising to fill similar roles. Some looked familiar, but others were unlike anything found elsewhere, armored giants and towering sloths that would turn the southern continent into its own experiment in evolution. While strange predators like creodonts and hyenodonts shaped much of the northern continents, South America was quietly following its own path. Cut off from North America, Africa, and Asia for tens of millions of years, it became an isolated laboratory of evolution. Separated by oceans, its ecosystems developed without the constant exchange of species that shaped other lands. What emerged there was a world of unique megafauna, animals found nowhere else, a hidden chapter in Earth's story that feels almost like another planet. Among the most remarkable of these creatures were the glyptodonts. These ancient relatives of armadillos were not small, scurrying insect eaters like their modern cousins. They were immense, some the size of a small car, with heavy domed shells made of fused bone. Their armor protected them against predators, while their tails, sometimes clubbed with thick bone, could be swung like hammers in defense. Imagine an enormous living tank, grazing on grasses and leaves, its back a fortress that few attackers would dare to challenge. Fossilized shells show the detail of their armored plates, each patterned like a mosaic, a natural shield perfected by millions of years of adaptation. Roaming the same landscapes were giant sloths, creatures that defy imagination when compared to the slow, tree-dwelling sloths of today. These ground sloths were larger than modern elephants, their massive claws able to pull down branches or dig for roots. Some could rear up on their hind legs, towering even higher, stretching their long arms to strip leaves from trees. Despite their size, they were herbivores, peaceful browsers that moved at a steady pace across plains and woodlands. Their bones, discovered in caves and ancient riverbeds, reveal just how immense they were, a lineage of giants that thrived in South America's isolation. But these were only part of the picture. The continent was filled with an extraordinary diversity of animals. There were ledipterns, hoofed mammals that resembled horses or camels, but were unrelated to either, their evolution entirely separate from the ungulates of the north. There were notungulates, a group of herbivores that varied from small rabbit-sized grazers to bulky rhinoceros-like browsers. Each form was a unique experiment, shaped by the absence of competition from the animals that filled those roles elsewhere. Predators in South America were equally unusual. Terror birds, towering flightless hunters, had ruled for millions of years, their hooked beaks striking down prey with deadly force. Later, when some carnivorous mammals finally reached the continent, They found themselves competing with these formidable birds that had already carved out the role of apex predator. It was a continent where familiar rules did not always apply, where evolution had written its story in unfamiliar forms. The ecosystems of South America were unlike any others on Earth. In the grasslands, armored glyptodonts grazed beside giant sloths, while herds of lydopterns and notangulates drifted across the plains. In the forests, smaller mammals and marsupials filled niches similar to squirrels, opossums, and even primates. Yet none of them were closely related to their northern counterparts. They were products of long isolation, shaped by an environment that had evolved in splendid solitude. Fossil discoveries have revealed this strange world in detail. Skulls of giant sloths, with deep jaws and long curved claws, suggest a life of steady browsing, while the shells of glyptodonts, sometimes perfectly preserved, show the weight and strength of their armored defenses. The diversity of South America's ancient life speaks to the power of separation. Cut off from the rest of the world, evolution filled every possible role with its own creations, leading to animals that looked familiar at first glance but were entirely unique. For tens of millions of years, this lost world thrived in balance. Its giants shaped the land as they grazed and browsed, creating openings in forests and dispersing seeds. Its predators kept herds in motion, ensuring that no single species overwhelmed the ecosystem. It was a land both strange and harmonious, a reminder that Earth's story has always been written in many voices, each continent adding its own verse. And while South America stood apart, its isolation would not last forever. Over time, shifting tectonic plates and rising land would build a bridge to the north, linking two continents that had been strangers for ages. When that moment came, the unique world of South America would collide with the animals of the north, unleashing one of the greatest exchanges of species in Earth's history. For tens of millions of years, South America had lived apart, its ecosystems unfolding in solitude, its strange giants and armored grazers shaping a world unlike any other. But nothing on Earth remains isolated forever. Deep beneath the oceans, tectonic plates were shifting, inch by inch, pushing land upward. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a new strip of Earth began to rise, a bridge that would change the fate of two continents. This was the birth of the Isthmus of Panama, and with it came one of the most extraordinary events in natural history, the Great American Interchange. The isthmus formed around 3 million years ago, when the movement of the Pacific and Caribbean plates forced land to thrust above the waves, linking North and South America for the first time in tens of millions of years. What had once been an impassable ocean channel now became a corridor of forests, rivers, and mountains. To the animals of both continents, it was as if an invisible wall had suddenly fallen. North and South were no longer separate worlds, but open highways of life. From the north came familiar predators and grazers. Cats, with their sharp claws and ambush hunting skills, padded silently into the forests and grasslands of South America. Wolves and other canids followed, their endurance and pack strategies giving them an edge in open habitats. Horses, which had evolved and diversified in the north, galloped southward, their speed and teeth suited to the vast plains that awaited them. Alongside them came deer and other hoofed mammals, adding new layers of competition to the landscapes they entered. South America, in turn, sent its own ambassadors north. Armadillos, their armored shells offering protection, wandered into new territories. Sloths moved into North American forests, some of them still the giant ground-dwelling forms that towered over most other creatures. Glyptodonts lumbered slowly across the land bridge, carrying their fortress-like shells into northern regions where no animal had seen such creatures before. Even small animals like opossums made the journey, their marsupial bodies thriving in niches overlooked by placental mammals. This exchange of species was not just a migration, but a tremendous reshaping of biodiversity. Ecosystems that had once been stable for millions of years were suddenly confronted with new competitors, new predators, and new prey. In South America, many of the unique animals that had thrived in isolation struggled against the invaders from the north. The terror birds, once apex hunters, declined as big cats and wolves claimed their place. Many of the strange ungulates of the southern continent could not withstand the pressure of competition from horses and deer. One by one, entire lineages faded, leaving only fossils to tell their stories. In North America, the story was different. The arrivals from the south fared better. Armadillos, opossums, and porcupines adapted and spread, carving out places in forests, deserts, and grasslands. Some sloths made it north, though the largest eventually disappeared. The asymmetry of this interchange remains one of the great puzzles of paleontology. Why did northern animals thrive in the south, while so many southern animals struggled in the north? Perhaps climate played a role, or differences in evolutionary history. The answer is still being pieced together, layer by layer, bone by bone. What is certain is that the Great American Interchange forever altered both continents. It was not just the rise of a land bridge, but the blending of two evolutionary tapestries that had been woven separately for millions of years. The predators and grazers that crossed reshaped the very fabric of life, setting the stage for the ecosystems we know today. North and South America were no longer isolated laboratories of evolution, but joined chapters in a shared story. And while the land bridge transformed the fate of animals across the Americas, in other parts of the world, new dramas were unfolding. On the plains and savannas of Africa, a cradle of life was stirring with its own treasures, giving rise to lineages that would shape the very future of mammals, including our own. As North and South America blended their fates through the land bridge of Panama, far across the oceans another continent was shaping a very different story. Africa, ancient and sunlit, was a land where forests and savannas shifted like tides, expanding and retreating as climates pulsed between wetter and drier ages. Within this dynamic backdrop, some of the most iconic animals of the modern world first emerged. Elephants, giraffes, and antelopes all trace their beginnings to this remarkable cradle of life. The landscapes of Africa were in constant motion, not from tectonic collisions, but from the rhythms of rainfall and temperature. At times, vast stretches of the continent were covered in dense forests, rich with canopies that sheltered primates, birds, and a multitude of insect life. At other times, those same forests gave way to wide savannas, open grasslands punctuated by trees, where herds could move freely and predators could watch from the shadows. This alternating pattern created a world of variety, one where animals were continually pushed to adapt, to stretch their bodies and behaviors in new directions. It was here that the ancestors of elephants first appeared. Early forms, far smaller than the giants we know today, moved along the rivers and wetlands of Africa. Their teeth reveal the story of their evolution, shifting from simple ridges suited to soft plants to complex grinding surfaces made for chewing grasses and tougher vegetation. Over time, their bodies grew larger, their tusks lengthened, and their trunks became versatile tools. These changes were not sudden but gradual, shaped by the shifting habitats that required them to browse in forests and graze in open plains. Eventually, their lineage gave rise to the mighty mammoths and mastodons that spread into Europe, Asia, and the Americas, yet their roots remain deep in African soil. Giraffes also have their beginnings in Africa, though their ancestors looked very different from the tall, graceful animals of today. Fossils show that early giraffids were shorter, with thick necks that were only slightly elongated compared to other mammals. Some species had multiple horns, while others were more deer-like in shape. But as savannas expanded and trees stood scattered rather than close-packed, an opportunity opened for those that could reach higher into the canopy. Over countless generations, necks stretched longer, legs grew taller, and the giraffes we know began to take form. The pattern of their evolution was tied directly to the African landscape, to trees that held their leaves above the heads of other herbivores, and to the competition for food that pushed one lineage to extraordinary heights. Antelopes too flourished here, their diversity unmatched anywhere else. From the small and delicate gazelles that could bound across the plains, to the massive and powerful eland, Africa became home to an astonishing variety of these swift grazers. Each species filled a slightly different niche, some preferring the open grasslands, others lingering near forest edges, and still others adapted to deserts or wetlands. Their horns, shapes, and sizes varied like the notes of a great song, each tuned to the demands of their environment. The antelopes became the lifeblood of Africa's ecosystems, their herds feeding predators, dispersing seeds, and shaping the grasses through their grazing. The alternating landscapes of forests and savannas also influenced predators, with prey like antelopes and giraffes available in abundance. Carnivores adapted to new strategies. Early big cats honed their ambush skills, crouching low in tall grass, while dog-like hunters pursued with endurance. Hyenas, already skilled scavengers, refined their bone-crushing jaws. Together, this community of hunters and hunted formed one of the most balanced and vibrant ecosystems on Earth, a system still visible in Africa today. Fossils across the continent preserve this unfolding history. In the valleys of East Africa, layers of sediment hold the bones of ancient elephants, giraffids, and antelopes, sometimes found alongside early human ancestors who lived in the same environments. These remains tell us that Africa was not just a birthplace for animals, but also for the species that would one day study them. The story of its wildlife and the story of humanity are tightly woven together, both shaped by the savannas and forests that rose and fell with the rhythm of the climate. As Africa's treasures spread outward, many lineages carried their influence across the world. Elephants reached Asia and Europe, giraffids spread into Eurasia, and antelope kin expanded into varied landscapes. But even as they dispersed, Africa remained the heart of their diversity, a place where shifting habitats kept the pulse of evolution beating strongly. And while Africa was crafting this living tapestry, far to the north another continent was telling its own tale. Europe, shaped by ice and by the movement of herds, held its own collection of great beasts, creatures that would one day leave their bones in caves and valleys, silent witnesses to the Ice Age rhythms that defined their world. While Africa's savannas pulsed with life and gave rise to creatures that would roam far beyond its borders, Europe was shaped by a very different rhythm. Here, the advance and retreat of glaciers carved the land again and again, a cycle of cold and thaw that sculpted valleys, rivers, and plains. Ice crept down from the north, grinding mountains into rounded slopes, then retreated, leaving behind new landscapes for life to inhabit. Within this restless world, a caste of great beasts thrived, their remains now preserved in the fossil-rich caves of Europe. Among the most iconic of these animals was the cave bear. Larger than any bear alive today, the males could weigh well over half a ton. They lived in forests and valleys, feeding mostly on plants despite their fearsome size. Fossils reveal their presence deep within caves across the continent, where they sheltered through harsh winters. Entire groups sometimes died in these shelters, leaving behind bones that paint a vivid picture of their lives. For early humans who also sought refuge in caves, the bear's presence would have been both a danger and a source of fascination, a giant neighbor, sharing the same darkened chambers of stone. Alongside them roamed the woolly rhinoceroses, massive creatures draped in thick coats of fur, their horns sweeping forward like weapons of ice and bone. These rhinoceroses grazed on the grasses of the cold steppes, scraping away snow to reach the food beneath. Their horns, sometimes stretching more than 3 feet in length, were not only tools for foraging, but also for defense, keeping predators at bay in the unforgiving Ice Age. Cave paintings left by humans show outlines of these animals, their shaggy forms etched in ochre and charcoal, suggesting that they were not just part of the landscape, but also part of memory and myth. The mammoths were perhaps the most famous of Europe's giants, their shaggy coats and long curving tusks making them symbols of the Ice Age. They moved in herds across vast open plains, feeding on grasses and sedges that grew in the cold but fertile ground left behind by retreating glaciers. Some tusks grew longer than a man's height, spiraling outward in graceful arcs. Fossilized remains, including frozen carcasses found in Siberia, preserve not only their bones but also their hair, skin, and even the last meals they ate. These details allow scientists to piece together a picture of animals perfectly adapted to a world of snow and wind. The caves of Europe hold not just the bones of these giants, but entire records of life and death. Fossil-rich layers show predator-prey cycles written in bone. Remains of cave lions, larger than today's lions, tell of powerful hunters that once stalked the mammoth steppe. Wolves left their teeth and skulls, marks of packs that may have begun their long relationship with humans during this time. The bones of horses, bison, and reindeer show the prey species that fed both humans and carnivores, completing the circle of survival within these harsh landscapes. Ice Age rhythms shaped all of it. During colder periods, herds of mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses expanded across the frozen plains, their populations thriving in the cold. As the glaciers retreated and forests returned, the ranges of these animals shifted, shrinking and expanding with the climate's pulse. These cycles repeated many times over hundreds of thousands of years, driving constant change. Animals adapted, migrated, or disappeared, their fates tied directly to the breathing of ice and warmth across the continent. The humans who entered these lands carried their own story into the caves. They painted on the walls, leaving images of bison, mammoths, and rhinoceroses, their art mingling with the bones scattered across the floors. These caves became time capsules, preserving not just the remains of animals, but the memories of people who shared the land with them. The combination of fossils and paintings allows a rare glimpse into ecosystems, both scientific and human, an overlap of survival and imagination. Europe's ancient beasts lived in a world of contrasts, of bitter winters and fleeting summers, of forests that vanished under glaciers and then returned with the thaw. They were creatures of resilience, shaped by the cold and remembered through the bones they left behind. And while these rhythms defined Europe, the oceans were experiencing their own dramas, where the rise of colossal predators would bring terror to the seas, just as mammoths and rhinoceroses did to the land. While the mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses ruled the frozen plains of Europe, The oceans held their own giants, predators so vast and powerful that even the largest land beasts could not compare. Beneath the waves, where sunlight faded into endless blue, there swam a hunter that was unmatched in size and strength. This was Megalodon, the greatest shark to have ever lived, and for millions of years it reigned as the undisputed ruler of the seas. Megalodon was a creature of immense proportions. Estimates suggest it could grow up to 60 feet in length, 3 times larger than the largest great white sharks alive today. Its jaws were wide enough to engulf a small car, lined with rows of serrated teeth designed to cut through flesh and bone. Each tooth, some more than 7 inches long, was larger than a human hand and weighed more than a pound. Fossilized teeth scattered across ancient seabeds are often the first clue people encounter of this giant's existence, their triangular shapes sharp even after millions of years buried in stone. The prey that sustained Megalodon was equally impressive. Early whales had begun to flourish in the Miocene oceans, some growing to sizes never before seen in marine mammals. These whales, along with seals, dolphins, and large fish, became the primary diet of the massive shark. Fossil bones of whales have been discovered with bite marks that match the size and shape of Megalodon's teeth, evidence of encounters that ended swiftly and violently. With a single bite, it could shear through rib cages, crush skulls, and drag entire bodies into the depths. The hunting strategy of Megalodon was likely very different from that of smaller sharks. Rather than chasing quick prey in bursts of speed, it may have relied on ambush, using its immense size to strike with overwhelming force. Scientists believe it often targeted the flippers or tails of whales first, disabling them before delivering a fatal bite. Once its prey was unable to swim, the massive shark could feed at leisure, consuming thousands of pounds of flesh in a single meal. The oceans of the Miocene and Pliocene, when Megalodon thrived, were warm and teeming with life. Coastal waters were rich with fish, seals crowded the beaches, and whales migrated across vast distances. For a predator of Megalodon's size, this abundance provided ample opportunity to grow and dominate. Yet the very abundance that fed it also carried the seeds of its downfall. Around 3 million years ago, ocean ecosystems began to change. Currents shifted as the Isthmus of Panama rose from the sea, altering the circulation of warm and cold waters between the Atlantic and Pacific. Global climates cooled, leading to the spread of polar ice and lowering sea levels. Many coastal areas that had once been rich feeding grounds vanished. At the same time, the whales that Megalodon depended on were evolving into new forms, some growing even larger and faster, while others shifted their ranges into colder waters where the giant shark could not easily follow. These changes placed immense pressure on Megalodon. A creature of such size required enormous amounts of food, and when that food became scarcer, survival grew harder. Younger sharks, smaller and more adaptable, had better chances in the new oceans. Great white sharks, though tiny compared to Megalodon, were faster, more flexible in diet, and able to thrive in cooler waters. Slowly, the balance tipped. The ruler of the seas lost its grip. Fossils tell us that by the end of the Pliocene, Megalodon was gone. No complete skeletons remain, only scattered vertebrae and the countless teeth that wash up on beaches or rest in layers of ancient rock. Yet those teeth are enough to remind us of what once swam in Earth's oceans, a predator so vast that its bite force is estimated to be the strongest of any animal in history. The story of Megalodon is both awe-inspiring and humbling. For millions of years it dominated the seas, yet even this giant was not immune to the shifting tides of climate and ecosystem. Its extinction cleared the way for whales to grow into the even greater giants of today, and for other predators to take its place. And while Megalodon vanished from the seas, on land new hunters with saber-like teeth were rising, preparing to carve their own place in the story of the Cenozoic. As the reign of Megalodon slipped beneath the waves, the land was preparing its own monarchs, predators whose very teeth became symbols of power and fear. These were the saber-toothed cats, most famously Smilodon, creatures whose long, curved fangs made them unlike any hunters alive today. For hundreds of thousands of years, they were the kings of the continents, shaping the fates of the herds they hunted and leaving behind fossils that still spark awe. Smilodon was not built like the sleek lions or leopards of the modern world. Its body was more compact, with short, muscular limbs and a broad chest. Its build suggests strength over speed, a predator designed not to chase prey across open plains, but to launch sudden, devastating ambushes. Hidden in tall grass or crouched in the shadows of woodlands, it could lunge with explosive force, bringing down animals much larger than itself. The most striking feature of Smilodon was its fangs. Each saber tooth could grow more than 7 inches long, curving downward like ivory blades. They were slender compared to the teeth of lions or tigers, but perfectly shaped for precision strikes. Scientists believe Smilodon used them to pierce soft areas of prey, such as the throat or belly, where a single bite could cause fatal wounds. Its jaws could open nearly twice as wide as those of modern cats, an adaptation that allowed room for such extraordinary weapons. The prey of these cats was equally impressive. During the Pleistocene, North and South America were home to vast herds of bison, horses, camels, and even mammoths. Smilodon thrived in this world of giants, using ambush and teamwork to bring down creatures far larger than itself. In places like the La Brea tar pits of California, thousands of Smilodon fossils have been preserved, their bones mingled with the remains of prey animals that became trapped in sticky pools of asphalt. These fossil beds provide a vivid record of how common and successful these predators were. Evidence from these sites suggests something surprising about their behavior. Unlike solitary cats, such as tigers, Smilodon may have lived and hunted in groups. Many skeletons show healed injuries, broken bones that had mended well enough for the animal to live for years afterward. In the wild, a predator with a broken leg or jaw would not survive alone. The fact that these injuries healed implies that other Smilodon may have shared food or offered protection, a sign of social behavior more like modern lions. Such cooperation would have made them even more formidable hunters, capable of taking down the largest prey through coordinated attacks. Their powerful front limbs were another clue to their hunting style. Where modern cats rely heavily on speed and claws, Smilodon's short, stocky arms were designed for grappling. Once it lunged from cover, it could latch onto prey with immense force, holding it steady while delivering a precise killing bite with its saber teeth. This method was risky, as the fangs were delicate compared to other teeth and could break if used against bone, but when aimed at the right spot, they were devastatingly effective. The world of the saber-toothed kings was harsh and competitive. Alongside them lived dire wolves, packs of large canids that roamed the plains, and American lions, which were larger than any big cat alive today. Yet Smilodon held its own, perfectly adapted to the mix of grasslands and woodlands that spread across the continents. Its presence was so dominant that when herds of bison or mammoths gathered, they did so under the constant threat of attack from the shadows. For more than 1 million years, Smilodon was one of the most successful predators on Earth. Its fossils are found from North to South America, marking it as a wide-ranging and adaptable hunter. But like Megalodon before it, the saber-toothed kings were bound to the ecosystems that sustained them. Their story would eventually be shaped by forces greater than strength or teeth, as climates shifted and new players entered the stage. For now, though, they were unrivaled on land, their long fangs gleaming as symbols of an age when ambush and power defined the art of the hunt. And in the cold expanses of Eurasia, another giant with a horned crown was carving its own place in the history of mammals, a beast so strange that some believe it inspired legends of unicorns. While saber-toothed cats waited in the shadows, with their fangs gleaming like ivory blades, across the wide steppes of Eurasia, another giant was shaping its place in the world. It was a rhinoceros, but not like the ones we know today. This was Elasmotherium, a beast so strange and imposing that it has been called the last unicorn. Its massive horn, its great shaggy body, and its survival into the very age of humans make it one of the most haunting figures of the Cenozoic. Elasmotherium was enormous, some individuals reaching a height taller than a man's head, even at the shoulder. Its body was broad and covered in thick hair, an adaptation to the bitter cold of Ice Age steppes, but its most defining feature was the horn. Fossil skulls show a vast bony dome on the forehead, a base large enough to anchor a horn that may have been over 6 feet long. Unlike the short, sharp horns of modern rhinos, this one was likely a towering spear rising from its brow in a single great curve. The function of the horn is still a matter of debate. Some scientists believe it was used for defense, a weapon capable of warding off predators like cave lions or packs of wolves. Others suggest it may have been used in battles between males, clashing in displays of strength over mates or territory. There is also evidence that it could have helped clear snow to reach buried grasses during harsh winters, sweeping the frozen ground aside like a giant blade. Whatever its purpose, the horn made Elasmotherium an unforgettable presence on the steppe. Its diet was simple but demanding. Unlike some other Ice Age grazers that mixed leaves and shrubs into their meals, Elasmotherium seems to have been specialized for grass. Its jaws were massive, its teeth deep-rooted and ridged, perfectly designed for grinding the tough, silica-filled blades of steppe grasses. Fossil wear patterns suggest it was a constant grazer, lowering its massive head to crop the plains day after day. The open landscapes of Eurasia provided the abundance it needed, but that dependence would one day be part of its downfall. What makes Elasmotherium so remarkable is how long it survived. While many other giants of the Miocene and Pliocene faded into extinction millions of years before, this rhinoceros endured until around 39,000 years ago. That means it lived at the same time as early humans, sharing the steppes with the ancestors who painted mammoths and bison on cave walls. Some legends passed down through cultures may carry echoes of its existence. Tales of unicorns, of one-horned beasts of great size and strength, may have been inspired by distant memories of encounters with Elasmotherium. The bones and skulls unearthed by ancient people could easily have fueled stories of mythical creatures, blending memory with imagination. Its survival alongside humans raises haunting questions. Did our ancestors ever see them alive, shaggy shadows moving across the horizon, with their horns glinting in the pale Ice Age sunlight? Were they hunted for meat, or feared as dangerous rivals of the plains? Or did they vanish too quickly, leaving only their remains for human eyes to discover? The answers are hidden in the soil and stone, in fossils scattered from Siberia to Ukraine, but the possibility lingers that humans and Elasmotherium walked the earth together. Despite its strength and size, Elasmotherium could not withstand the changing world forever. As climates shifted and grasses declined in certain regions, Its specialized diet may have left it vulnerable. Competition with other grazers, combined with the spread of humans across Eurasia, likely placed enormous pressure on the species. By the time mammoths still roamed and saber-toothed cats still hunted, the last unicorn had disappeared, leaving behind only its bones and the myths it inspired. Yet its story is a powerful reminder of how real animals can become the seeds of legend. The unicorn, a creature of fantasy, may owe its roots to a shaggy rhinoceros that thundered across the frozen plains of the Pleistocene. And as Elasmotherium faded from the steppe, other giants pressed forward, filling the tundra and grasslands in herds so vast that they became the very heartbeat of the Ice Age world. As Elasmotherium grazed the frozen plains with its great horn sweeping through the snow, it shared that world with one of the most remarkable ecosystems ever to exist. This was the Mammoth Steppe, the largest biome on Earth during the Ice Age, a vast stretch of grassland that spanned from the shores of Spain in the west to the endless tundra of Siberia in the east. It was a land of extremes, of long winters where the sunlight barely rose above the horizon, and summers that bathed the plains in bursts of green and gold. And yet, in spite of its harshness, it thrived with life. The Mammoth Steppe was dominated not by forests, which had retreated under the weight of cold, nor by deserts, which lacked the moisture to sustain herds, but by grasslands. These grasses, hardy and resilient, covered thousands upon thousands of miles. They anchored the soil, provided steady food even under thin layers of snow, and created a landscape that could sustain immense numbers of grazing animals. Unlike modern tundra, which is sparse and limited, the Mammoth Steppe was rich, a sea of grass that nourished entire continents. Across this vastness roamed the mammoths, their shaggy coats, long curving tusks, and massive bulk made them the icons of this biome. Mammoths moved in herds, mothers guiding their young across plains, following the growth of grasses and the thawing of rivers. Their tusks, some longer than a man was tall, were used to sweep away snow, to battle rivals, and to shape the icy ground as they searched for food. Footprints pressed into ancient mud show the trails of these herds, long lines of giants carving pathways through the cold. Alongside them moved bison, their dark forms crowding together in immense groups. These herds could stretch for miles, their movements stirring the air and pounding the earth as they grazed and migrated. The bison of the Mammoth Steppe were larger than those of today, their horns spreading wide, their shaggy coats thicker against the wind. Their presence was central to the balance of the steppe, their grazing keeping the grasses in check and encouraging new growth. Horses also thrived here, ancestors of the modern breeds that would one day carry humans across the world. These Ice Age horses were smaller than the ones we know now, but swift and resilient, their teeth perfectly adapted for grinding the steppe's coarse grasses. Fossil herds show the diversity of their forms, some stockier, others leaner, each one shaped by the demands of the plains. They were prey for the great predators of the steppe, yet their speed and endurance allowed them to flourish in immense numbers. Together, mammoths, bison, and horses formed the backbone of this ecosystem. Their constant movement, their grazing and trampling, shaped the very land they walked upon. They broke the snow, spread seeds in their droppings, and kept the grasslands alive. Behind them came predators, wolves and cave lions, and scavengers that fed on what the herds left behind. It was a living machine that stretched across continents, bound together by grass and ice. The scale of the Mammoth Steppe is difficult to imagine today. Modern grasslands, like the Serengeti of Africa or the prairies of North America, seem vast, But the Ice Age steppe dwarfed them all. It wrapped around the northern hemisphere in a nearly unbroken belt, a single biome that linked Spain, France, Germany, Russia, Mongolia, and Siberia into one endless sweep of land. Fossil evidence shows the same species stretching across this immense distance, their bones telling a story of connected worlds where animals could migrate freely for thousands of miles. And yet, despite the cold, it was not barren. Summer brought bursts of flowers among the grasses, attracting insects and birds. Rivers ran through valleys, carrying fish and fresh water. Reindeer, musk oxen, and saiga antelope joined the herds, each filling its place in the rhythm of life. Even in the depths of winter, when snow fell heavily and winds scoured the plains, life endured, the herds pushing onward, their endurance as great as the land itself. The mammoth steppe was more than just the backdrop of the Ice Age. It was the stage upon which humans would one day step, following the herds for food, carving survival from the same grasses that fed the giants. But before that moment, the steppe belonged to the animals themselves, a world ruled not by walls of forest or mountains, but by the open horizon, by the breath of the wind across endless grass, and by the footsteps of giants echoing from one end of a continent to the other. And far to the south, in the land of Australia, isolation was once again shaping life in strange and wondrous forms, where marsupials rose into giants unlike anything else the world had ever seen, while herds of mammoths and bison thundered across the northern plains. Far to the south, another world was unfolding, one that had been shaped not by contact but by isolation. Australia had long been separated from the other continents, drifting like a raft through the oceans. This separation gave evolution free rein, creating animals unlike any found elsewhere. Here, marsupials rose into giants, filling roles that on other continents belonged to very different creatures. The land became a theater of the unusual, a place where strangeness became the rule. Among the most impressive of Australia's giants was Diprotodon, the largest marsupial that has ever lived. It was a relative of wombats and koalas, though far larger, some growing more than 13 feet long and weighing over 2 tons. Diprotodon moved slowly across the open woodlands and plains, browsing on leaves, shrubs, and grasses. Its skull was broad, with strong jaws for chewing tough vegetation, and its body was barrel-shaped, carried on pillar-like legs. To see a herd of Diprotodons would have been like seeing a procession of living tanks, gentle but unstoppable as they grazed their way across the landscape. Sharing the plains were giant kangaroos, not the quick hoppers we know today, but towering browsers that could reach leaves high above the ground. Some stood over 10 feet tall, using their great size to strip foliage and defend themselves against predators. Their bones suggest they walked more than they hopped, moving with slow, deliberate strides rather than bounding in leaps. These kangaroos were built for strength rather than speed, their powerful tails and limbs making them some of the most formidable herbivores of the southern continent. Predators, too, carved their place in this world of marsupials. Chief among them was Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion. Despite its name, it was not related to lions or any other placental cats, but it evolved to fill the same role. Thylacoleo was about the size of a leopard, with strong forelimbs, retractable claws, and powerful jaws. Its front teeth had transformed into shearing blades, perfect for slicing through flesh and bone. Fossils suggest it could climb trees and ambush prey from above, dropping down with explosive force. In the absence of big cats or wolves, this marsupial predator ruled the forests and plains, one of the strangest hunters ever to walk the earth. The diversity of this world was remarkable. There were giant flightless birds, similar in scale to the terror birds of South America, though adapted in their own unique ways. Enormous reptiles, including giant monitor lizards like Megalania, stretched nearly 20 feet in length, stalking prey with stealth and venom. Even the smaller animals carried unusual twists, from marsupial tapirs to creatures with features seen nowhere else. Isolation had created an entire ecosystem where marsupials, reptiles, and birds took on the roles filled elsewhere by elephants, horses, and cats. What makes the story of Australia's giants even more haunting is how recently they lived. Many of them coexisted with early Aboriginal peoples, who arrived on the continent around 50,000 years ago. These first Australians would have walked among diprotodons, encountered giant kangaroos browsing at tree lines, and faced predators like Thylacoleo and Megalania. Rock art in some regions is thought to depict these vanished creatures, etched into stone by people who may have seen them with their own eyes. The presence of humans added new pressures to an already fragile ecosystem. Fire was used to shape the land, changing the balance of habitats. Hunting, even at a small scale, could have tipped the scales for animals already vulnerable to climate fluctuations. As Ice Age climates grew drier and less predictable, the combined stress of environmental change and human activity may have pushed these giants toward extinction. By the time mammoths still roamed in the far north, Australia's marsupial titans had faded into memory. Yet their legacy remains in the bones scattered across caves and dry lake beds, in the stories of Aboriginal peoples that describe creatures unlike those living today, and in the marsupials that still inhabit the continent. Kangaroos, wombats, and koalas are the smaller heirs of a lineage that once produced giants, reminders of a time when Australia was a kingdom of the strange and the mighty. And while the southern lands carried their marsupial wonders, in the frozen north other titans pressed forward, adapting to cold so fierce that even breath could freeze in the air. It was there, on the icy tundra, that woolly mammoths and rhinoceroses left their mark as the enduring symbols of the Ice Age. As the giants of Australia vanished into memory, the northern world was locked in the grip of ice. Vast sheets of glaciers crept down from the poles, sculpting mountains and spreading across valleys. The air was cold and dry, the winds sharp, and yet life did not retreat from this frozen stage. Instead, it adapted, clothing itself in thick coats of fur, building strength to endure bitter seasons and finding ways to graze where snow lay deep. These were the Ice Age titans of the north, creatures that became the very symbols of survival against cold. Foremost among them were the woolly mammoths. These great elephants were covered in shaggy coats of brown hair, with a dense underlayer of wool to trap warmth. Their ears were small and rounded to prevent heat loss, their fat reserves heavy, and their long curving tusks stretched outward like arcs of ivory. Some tusks grew longer than 12 feet, curling in graceful spirals. They were not just ornaments but tools, used to sweep aside snow, clear paths, or battle rivals during the mating season. Herds of mammoths moved across the tundra and steppe, guided by the memory of ancient routes, their calves sheltered at the center, their footsteps pressing deep into the frozen ground. Beside them lived the woolly rhinoceroses, just as formidable in their own way. Covered in long, shaggy fur, their bodies were adapted to cold, with thick skin and layers of fat. Their horns, often longer than 3 feet, were tilted forward, and many fossil skulls show wear marks that suggest they swept them side to side, brushing away snow to uncover grass beneath. Unlike the rhinoceroses of Africa, these beasts thrived in icy plains, their heavy forms moving with determination through winds that would have frozen smaller creatures. Their bones, preserved in Siberian permafrost, sometimes still hold traces of their last meals, frozen in time as proof of their resilience. Alongside these giants roamed the musk ox, smaller in scale but no less adapted to the cold. Their long, shaggy coats hung nearly to the ground, forming a curtain of insulation, while their strong hooves broke through ice to reach plants hidden beneath. Musk oxen were masters of endurance, gathering in defensive circles with their horns turned outward whenever wolves approached. Their fossil record stretches back hundreds of thousands of years, showing a lineage that weathered countless swings of climate, surviving where many larger animals could not. Even today, musk oxen remain on the tundra, living relics of the Ice Age. The steppe bison added their own presence to this frozen theater. Larger than modern bison, with sweeping horns that spanned more than 6 feet, they grazed in immense herds across the mammoth steppe. Their dark forms would have filled the horizon, their movements stirring clouds of snow and leaving deep trails across the land. Cave paintings in Europe depict these bison with striking accuracy, their humps, horns, and thick coats immortalized in ochre and charcoal by the humans who depended on them for food and clothing. The bond between people and bison was one of survival, a link carved in both bone and art. The adaptations of these animals to extreme cold reveal the creativity of evolution. Layers of fat, dense fur, shortened extremities, and behaviors tuned to the seasons all allowed them to thrive in conditions that would have seemed uninhabitable. They fed on hardy grasses, sedges, and shrubs, finding nourishment in landscapes that offered little. Their bodies endured long winters with scarce food, then rebounded during short but rich summers, when plants grew rapidly under nearly endless sunlight. The cycle of hardship and abundance shaped every detail of their existence. The Ice Age titans of the North were not solitary figures. They formed herds, built social bonds, and moved together across the land. Their presence defined the ecosystems of the tundra, keeping grasses trimmed, dispersing seeds, and feeding predators that followed them. Their bones still lie buried in caves and frozen soils, often preserved with skin, hair, and even stomach contents intact, vivid reminders of the cold world they called home. And as these giants roamed the tundra and steppe, another kind of creature was beginning to rise among them, small in body, but carrying the spark of something new. The first human ancestors were stepping into this frozen stage, adapting in their own ways, and preparing to share the world with beasts that had reigned for millions of years. As woolly mammoths, rhinoceroses, and steppe bison moved across the frozen plains, another kind of creature was beginning to appear, one that was small compared to the giants, but carried within it something more powerful than tusks or horns. This was the lineage of humans, fragile in body yet armed with intelligence, memory, and adaptability. The first of these ancestors did not stride across the ice of Europe or the grasslands of Siberia. Their story began much earlier in the shifting landscapes of Africa, where forests blended with savannas and survival meant adjusting to constant change. Australopithecus was among the earliest of these ancestors. These beings stood upright, walking on 2 legs while still climbing trees for safety and food. They were not tall or powerful, averaging only around 4 feet in height, but their ability to walk freed their hands. This small shift, from moving on all fours to balancing upright, was a turning point that allowed them to carry food, gather tools, and one day shape their environment in ways no other animal could. Fossils of Australopithecus show both ape-like traits and human-like strides, a body in transition, poised between 2 worlds. From this foundation came Homo habilis, whose name means handyman. With them, the first stone tools appeared, rough but purposeful. These early tools were flakes struck from larger rocks, sharp enough to cut meat or scrape hides. For the first time, an ancestor could shape the world with something other than tooth or claw. This change opened new possibilities. Meat from large animals, once inaccessible, could now be scavenged from carcasses left by predators. Bones could be cracked for marrow, and hides could be prepared for warmth. Homo habilis carried knowledge in their hands, passing it from one generation to the next. The lineage continued with Homo erectus, a species that spread far beyond Africa into Asia and Europe. They stood taller, their bodies stronger, and their tools more refined. Stone axes with sharp edges allowed them to cut wood, butcher prey, and dig for roots. It was with Homo erectus that another breakthrough came, perhaps the most important of all, the control of fire. Fire meant warmth in cold nights, protection from predators, and the ability to cook food, making it safer and easier to digest. Around campfires, light flickered on faces as knowledge was shared, and the first shadows of culture began to emerge. These human ancestors did not live apart from the giants of their time. They adapted alongside them, moving with herds, following seasonal migrations, and sometimes daring to hunt animals far larger than themselves. Fossil evidence shows cut marks on the bones of ancient elephants, proof that early humans worked together to bring down prey many times their size. To stand against such creatures required cooperation, communication, and planning. These skills became as vital as strength, turning survival into a shared effort rather than an individual struggle. The world of these ancestors was filled with danger. Predators like saber-toothed cats and cave lions lurked at the edges of the firelight. Massive herbivores roamed the plains, and a single misplaced step near them could be fatal. Yet humans thrived not by outmatching these animals in strength, but by learning their patterns, by observing migrations, and by remembering where rivers flowed or where plants grew in each season. Their brains became their greatest adaptation, allowing them to weave memory and experience into tools for survival. The spread of Homo erectus across continents was a sign of how adaptable humans had become. They lived in forests, grasslands, and near coasts, crafting tools suited to each place. Their mastery of fire allowed them to enter colder regions, to face nights that would have killed unprotected bodies. Wherever they went, they encountered new species of megafauna, from giant elephants to rhinoceroses, and each encounter shaped their story. What began with small Australopithecus bodies walking upright had become a lineage capable of reshaping the balance of ecosystems. These ancestors lived alongside the giants, not replacing them at first, but learning from their presence, testing the boundaries of what it meant to survive in a world filled with massive beasts. And as these early humans spread further across the globe, another chapter was waiting. A new species, Homo sapiens, would emerge, carrying with them not only fire and tools, but art, language, and imagination, ready to step into a world still ruled by mammoths and saber-tooths and leave their mark upon it. From the flickering firelight of Homo erectus, the story of humanity moved forward. Out of Africa, in the valleys and savannas where earlier ancestors first learned to walk upright, a new species emerged, one that would carry the weight of imagination, memory, and invention further than any before. These were Homo sapiens, our own kind, and their journey across the earth would change the fate of every landscape and every giant they encountered. The beginning of this journey is traced back more than 100,000 years ago. Africa, with its patchwork of forests, savannas, and deserts, was the cradle of Homo sapiens. Here they developed sharper tools, crafted from stone and bone, with edges precise enough to carve hides, cut meat, and shape wood. They painted ochre on their bodies, strung shells into ornaments, and began to weave symbolic thought into daily life. This blending of survival and creativity marked them apart. Their brains were not only adapted for remembering seasons and tracking prey, but also for imagining, planning, and sharing stories. With time, groups of humans began to move outward, first along the coasts of the Red Sea and across the narrow strait into the Arabian Peninsula. They followed rivers and shorelines, carrying fire, tools, and knowledge. Each step was cautious yet determined. By 60,000 years ago, humans had spread into Asia, walking along fertile valleys, skirting deserts, and entering forests where unfamiliar animals roamed. They adapted to new foods, from fish along riverbanks to fruits in tropical forests, and carried with them the memory of places left behind. In Europe, their arrival brought encounters with both ancient animals and ancient relatives. Here they found the great mammoths wandering the tundra, their tusks gleaming in the low winter sunlight. Herds of steppe bison grazed across plains, while reindeer migrated in vast numbers, their antlers sweeping above the snow. Humans tracked these herds, learning their rhythms, and relied on them for food, clothing, and shelter. At the same time, Homo sapiens met Neanderthals, who had lived in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. The two groups sometimes competed for resources, but they also shared knowledge, and traces of their encounters remain written in our DNA. Further east, humans encountered the woolly rhinoceroses, formidable grazers with thick coats and horns, powerful enough to sweep through snow and fend off predators. In the shadows of Eurasia's wide steppes, they may also have glimpsed Elasmotherium, the shaggy giant with its massive horn, a creature so striking it may have left echoes in the myths of unicorns. To meet such a beast on an open plain must have been both awe-inspiring and frightening, a reminder that this was still a world where humans were small beside giants. In Asia, humans pressed deeper into forests, mountains, and coasts. They crafted new tools to fish rivers and hunt gazelle, and they learned to make clothing suited for cold climates. Their migrations carried them into Southeast Asia, where giant reptiles and marsupials lived, and onward into Australia, where they encountered diprotodons, giant kangaroos, and marsupial lions. Rock art on sandstone cliffs may preserve some of these encounters, etched by the earliest Aboriginal peoples, who left their mark on the land as they adapted to its strange and wondrous creatures. Eventually, humans reached the edges of Siberia. From there, groups pressed into the frozen lands of Beringia, the land bridge that once connected Asia and North America. This crossing, perhaps 20,000 years ago, opened an entirely new world. In the Americas, humans encountered herds of mastodons in the forests, giant ground sloths in the grasslands, and flocks of birds larger than any alive today. Predators like the American lion and Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, stalked the plains. Each step into these new continents was a meeting with the unknown, with animals that had never before seen humans, and with challenges that required ingenuity and cooperation to overcome. Wherever humans traveled, they carried not just tools, but firelight, language, and imagination. They sang, they painted, they carved stories into caves and onto bones. Their spread across Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, and the Americas was not a single migration, but a series of journeys, overlapping and branching, each one leaving a mark on the land and on the giants they encountered. And as humans spread further, their presence began to alter the balance of life itself. The world was still rich with megafauna, yet the growing partnership of climate change and human activity would soon begin to reshape this abundance. Some giants would vanish, while others would endure, carrying forward the echoes of a time when humans first stepped onto the same stage as mammoths, saber-tooths, and rhinoceroses with horns like lances. When humans crossed the seas and first set foot on the continent of Australia around 50,000 years ago, they stepped into a land like no other. Here, marsupials had grown into giants, birds loomed taller than a man, and reptiles stretched longer than most trees were tall. The newcomers carried fire, stone tools, and the knowledge passed down through countless generations of travel. But their arrival would mark a turning point for Australia's unique wildlife, a shift so profound that it echoes still in the bones left behind in caves, lakes, and riverbeds. Among the first animals they would have seen were the great diprotodons, marsupials larger than any wombat or kangaroo alive today. Herds of these enormous grazers browsed the forests and plains, their massive bodies moving slowly but surely across the land. Alongside them were giant kangaroos, some standing more than 10 feet tall, their heavy limbs built for browsing high foliage rather than leaping. Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion, lurked in the shadows of woodlands, a predator with slicing teeth and powerful forelimbs, waiting for the chance to ambush prey. Towering above them all were birds like Genyornis, a flightless giant weighing hundreds of pounds, striding across the plains in groups. And in the heat of the north, the immense reptile Megalania stalked, a venomous lizard longer than 20 feet, a formidable hunter that may have preyed even upon humans. This was the stage into which the first Aboriginal peoples arrived, carrying with them new tools and strategies and a deep capacity for reshaping landscapes. The evidence suggests that these humans did not simply adapt to the environment but transformed it. Fire was one of their greatest tools. By burning stretches of forest and grassland, they opened the land for new growth, guiding the spread of plants that supported their needs. But this fire also disrupted habitats that had sustained the giants for millennia. Plants that had once flourished in unburned tracts of forest became scarce, and the animals that depended on them grew more vulnerable. Hunting, too, left its mark. Even small groups of humans could make a difference when targeting slow-breeding animals like Diprotodon. A single spear thrust or coordinated effort could bring down a giant, providing meat, bone, and hide to sustain communities. Fossil sites reveal bones of these creatures with cut marks, silent proof that they were hunted by human hands. Over thousands of years, the pressure grew. Populations of the great marsupials dwindled, and one by one they disappeared. The loss of these animals was not limited to the giants alone. With diprotodons gone, the forests they once grazed shifted in structure. Without giant kangaroos browsing tall shrubs, plant communities changed. Without Megalania or Thylacoleo, the balance of predators was altered. The extinction of these large species cascaded through ecosystems, reshaping the very land itself. By around 30,000 years ago, many of the giants were gone. Diprotodon herds no longer moved across the plains. The marsupial lion vanished from its ambush sites. The thunderous footsteps of giant kangaroos fell silent. Even the great birds, once so common, disappeared from the record, leaving only eggshell fragments in the sand as evidence they had ever lived. The reasons for this wave of extinctions are still studied and debated. Climate change brought drier conditions during the Ice Age, adding stress to fragile ecosystems. Yet the timing aligns closely with the arrival and spread of humans, suggesting that hunting and burning were decisive forces. When combined, these pressures were too great for the marsupial giants to endure, and yet traces of them remain, not only in bones but in memory. Aboriginal stories passed down through oral traditions describe giant beasts, clawed hunters, and birds of immense size. Some may be echoes of encounters with creatures that had recently vanished. memories woven into myth but rooted in truth. Rock art, too, preserves shapes of animals that no longer walk the earth, etched into stone by hands that once lived alongside them. The loss of Australia's giants was one of the earliest waves of human-driven extinction, a story that foreshadowed what would unfold on other continents. And as people spread further, crossing into the Americas, they would once again encounter a land rich with great beasts, a land whose fate would be tied to the footsteps of the humans who entered it. As the last diprotodons fell silent in Australia and the marsupial lion faded into memory, far across the oceans, another land was alive with its own astonishing cast of giants. North America, with its mountains, prairies, and vast forests, was home to creatures that rivaled anything seen elsewhere. Here, in the millennia before humans arrived, the landscape thrived with mastodons, towering bears, and beavers larger than men. It was a land of abundance and diversity, a world balanced delicately between prey and predator, where every valley and river held a creature unlike any we know today. Mastodons were among the most iconic of these beasts. Close relatives of elephants and mammoths, they were shorter and stockier, with straighter tusks and shaggy coats of hair. Their teeth were different too, built for grinding twigs, leaves, and bark, rather than the grasses preferred by mammoths. Mastodons thrived in the forests and wetlands of North America, feeding on conifers and shrubs, their herds shaping the very structure of woodlands. Fossils of mastodon skeletons are often found in bogs and lakes, their bones perfectly preserved in the oxygen-poor sediments, reminders of animals that once roamed from Alaska to Florida. Along the rivers and lakes, another giant left its mark. The giant beaver, Castoroides, was a creature both familiar and strange. Growing nearly 8 feet long and weighing close to 200 pounds, it dwarfed the beavers of today. Unlike their modern cousins, these beavers may not have built dams, but their enormous size and strong teeth suggest they could cut through thick branches with ease. Imagine rivers edged by the sounds of these massive rodents, splashing and chewing, reshaping wetlands in ways no animal has done since. Fossil skulls reveal incisors longer than a man's finger, orange with iron, designed for a life of cutting wood and grinding plants. But it was the short-faced bear that perhaps inspired the greatest awe and fear. Arctodus, as it is called, was one of the largest land carnivores to ever exist, standing more than 12 feet tall when reared on its hind legs. Its limbs were long and slender compared to modern bears, built for speed rather than lumbering strength. Scientists believe it may have been capable of running down prey across open ground, a pursuit predator rather than a simple scavenger. Its sheer size meant that few animals could challenge it, and in any contest over a kill, the short-faced bear would have won. Fossil evidence shows it roamed from the tundra of Alaska down into the heart of the continent, a ruler of the Pleistocene plains. These giants lived alongside others as well. Ground sloths the size of small elephants pulled down tree branches with their claws. Herds of ancient camels grazed the grasslands, while horses, native to North America before vanishing and later returning with Europeans, galloped across prairies in great numbers. Saber-toothed cats stalked bison and horses, dire wolves moved in packs, and condors with wingspans wider than a man is tall soared above the carcasses left behind. North America was a tapestry of abundance, every niche filled, every ecosystem rich with variety. And then humans arrived, crossing the land bridge of Beringia from Siberia perhaps 20,000 years ago. Small groups spread southward through ice-free corridors and along coastlines. They carried stone-tipped spears and a knowledge of cooperative hunting that allowed them to challenge animals many times their size. Archaeological sites reveal butchered mastodon bones marked with flint blades, evidence that people targeted even the largest prey. In caves, the remains of short-faced bears suggest encounters that must have been both dangerous and decisive. The speed of what followed was astonishing. Within only a few thousand years of human arrival, many of North America's giants were gone. Mastodons disappeared, their herds no longer shaping forests. Giant beavers vanished from the rivers, leaving ecosystems forever changed. The short-faced bear, once dominant, faded from the record, its power no match for shifting climates and human competition. Ground sloths, camels, and horses all vanished as well, their bones left as silent witnesses to a world undone in the blink of geological time. The reasons for this wave of extinctions remain complex. Climate at the end of the Ice Age was warming, altering habitats, and shrinking the ranges of cold-adapted species. But the timing aligns closely with the arrival of humans, suggesting that hunting, combined with habitat changes, placed a burden too heavy for the giants to bear. What had thrived for millions of years ended in just a handful of millennia, the transition so swift it stands out starkly in the fossil record. Yet even in their absence, the memory of these animals lingers. In bones pulled from tar pits, in carvings and stories from early peoples, in the fossils that scientists piece together, the great beasts of North America remind us that the world we see today is only the latest chapter of a far grander story. And just as the northern continent lost its giants, so too would the rest of the world, as climate instability and human expansion continued to shape the fate of the megafauna. The silence that followed the disappearance of North America's mastodons, short-faced bears, and giant beavers was only one part of a greater pattern unfolding across the earth. From the plains of South America to the steppes of Eurasia, from the savannas of Africa to the islands of the Pacific, the great beasts that had ruled for millions of years were entering their final days. It was not a single moment, but a cascade, a slow unraveling of an age that had once belonged to giants. The world was changing. The ice ages that had dominated the Pleistocene were coming to an end. Glaciers that had once stretched across continents began to retreat, releasing floods of meltwater into the oceans. Weather patterns shifted unpredictably, with cold snaps followed by sudden warming. Grasslands shrank in some regions, forests spread in others, and rainfall rhythms altered across entire continents. Animals that had evolved to thrive in the steady cold of the mammoth steppe or the wide-open plains of the Americas now found their habitats shrinking beneath them. For the great herbivores, these changes were devastating. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and giant ground sloths all relied on vast stretches of grazing land. As climates shifted, grasses retreated in some places, replaced by forests or scrubland, reducing the abundance they needed. The giants that had once roamed in herds, numbering in the thousands, began to dwindle, their numbers falling year by year as food grew scarce. Yet climate was only one part of the story. The arrival and spread of humans placed new pressures on ecosystems already under stress. Wherever people traveled, evidence of hunting followed. In Siberia, mammoth bones have been found with spear points embedded in them, marks of human weapons driven into their hides. In South America, the remains of giant ground sloths carry cut marks from stone tools, showing they were butchered for meat. In Europe, cave paintings capture not only the beauty of animals like bison and horses, but perhaps also the reverence of hunters who depended on them for survival. Hunting alone may not have been enough to destroy entire species, but combined with shifting climates, it became a burden too heavy for the giants to endure. Many of these animals reproduce slowly, with long lifespans and few young. A steady loss of individuals to hunting could tip fragile populations into collapse. The giants of the Ice Age were not prepared for the dual challenge of shrinking habitats and a new predator that was clever, cooperative, and relentless. By around 10,000 years ago, the impact was visible across the globe. In South America, the armored glyptodonts vanished, their car-sized shells left buried in riverbeds. The giant ground sloths disappeared, leaving only the smaller tree-dwelling species we know today. In Eurasia, woolly rhinoceroses, once common across the frozen plains, were gone, their shaggy coats no longer grazing the steppes. Mammoths, once spread from Spain to Siberia, survived only in small, isolated populations on islands, lingering for a few thousand more years before fading completely. Even islands could not escape this wave of loss. On the Mediterranean islands, dwarf elephants and hippos that had adapted to their small environments were hunted into extinction. In New Zealand, the moa, a group of giant flightless birds, disappeared within centuries of human arrival. In Madagascar, elephant birds, towering creatures that laid eggs larger than a football, vanished as people spread across the island. The pattern repeated again and again, a thread woven into every continent and ocean. Only in Africa did many giants survive, from elephants to giraffes to rhinoceroses. Scientists believe this is because humans and megafauna had coexisted there the longest. Animals had time to adapt to human presence, learning to fear and avoid them, unlike the giants of other lands that faced humans suddenly and without warning. The disappearance of megafauna worldwide reshaped the planet in ways still felt today. Ecosystems lost their engineers, the animals that once trampled forests, spread seeds, and carved grasslands with their migrations. Without mammoths, the mammoth steppe gave way to tundra. Without ground sloths, certain plant species lost their dispersers. The landscapes of Earth became quieter, less dramatic, as the age of giants gave way to the age of humans. And yet, the echoes of those vanished creatures remain. Their bones lie frozen in permafrost, buried in caves, and preserved in tar pits. Their stories linger in myths of dragons, unicorns, and monsters, faint memories of real animals that once inspired awe. And as the giants slipped into their final days, smaller survivors endured, carrying the threads of evolution forward, weaving the next chapters of life on Earth. When the Ice Age giants fell silent, when mammoths no longer roamed the steppes and saber-toothed cats no longer crouched in tall grass, the Earth did not empty of life. Instead, it shifted. Some lineages endured, holding on like threads woven across deep time. They were the survivors, the echoes of an age now gone, reminders that even as extinction claimed many, resilience allowed others to carry forward. Among the largest of those survivors were the elephants. They are the closest living relatives of mammoths and mastodons, their massive forms still pressing deep tracks into the soil of Africa and Asia. Elephants carry the same intelligence and social bonds that once guided herds of mammoths, the same sweeping tusks used to strip bark from trees and dig into dry ground for water. Their presence today is a glimpse of what the world must have looked like when giants shaped every ecosystem, their migrations opening forests, spreading seeds, and carving pathways through the land. Rhinoceroses, too, survived the wave of extinctions, though their numbers have grown fragile. Modern rhinos, with their thick hides and single or double horns, are descendants of a lineage that once included the woolly rhinoceros and even greater forms like Elasmotherium. They still graze grasslands and browse forests, carrying forward a role that once anchored the balance of ecosystems. Their heavy steps, their wide mouths, and their stubborn strength keep alive the memory of Ice Age grazers that vanished when climates shifted and humans spread. The oceans, too, hold survivors of deep history. Whales, born from land mammals that returned to the sea, remain as living monuments to evolution. The great blue whale, the largest animal to ever live, is a direct heir of the story that began with Pakicetus wading in shallow waters. Unlike Megalodon, which dominated the seas for millions of years before vanishing, whales adapted and endured. Some species grew larger, others learned to dive deeper, and together they carried their lineage forward into the present. Their songs still ripple through oceans, a haunting continuation of a story that began when the first mammals dared to leave the shore behind. Yet survival was not only for the giants. Small mammals, often overlooked, carried forward much of the evolutionary story. Rodents, with their sharp teeth and rapid breeding, spread into every environment. Shrews, bats, and rabbits multiplied, finding niches in forests, deserts, and tundras. Their adaptability was their strength. They could hide, reproduce quickly, and feed on diverse foods. When climates shifted or predators came, they endured by bending rather than breaking. Their fossils show a continuity that outlasted the giants, a quiet persistence that shaped the future of ecosystems long after mammoths and mastodons were gone. Birds, too, carried the flame of survival. Descended from dinosaurs, they had already proven their resilience once when their ancient relatives perished at the end of the Cretaceous. Now, through the upheavals of the Ice Age and the loss of megafauna, they endured again. Small songbirds flitted through forests, seabirds crossed oceans, and raptors circled above plains. Even as some great birds like the terror birds and the moas disappeared, countless others thrived, adapting to new climates, new predators, and new food sources. Their wings carried forward a lineage older than mammals themselves, reminding us that flight was one of the most enduring solutions life ever found. The resilience of adaptable species was the thread that tied all of this together. Survival favored not only strength or size, but flexibility, the ability to eat many foods, to live in different habitats, to breed quickly, or to migrate long distances meant the difference between extinction and endurance. Elephants, rhinos, and whales represent the great survivors among giants, but it was the countless small creatures, the rodents, birds, and bats, that became the real inheritors of the earth. Their abundance filled the gaps left behind, reshaping ecosystems into new patterns that would carry forward into the Holocene. The story of the survivors is not only about what endured, but about what remains connected to the vanished. Every elephant is an echo of mammoths, every rhino a shadow of the woolly rhinoceroses, every whale a continuation of the journey begun by walking ancestors that returned to the sea. Every mouse and sparrow is a reminder that smallness, adaptability, and resilience can outlast giants. And as these survivors carried their lineages into the future, humans were also carrying memories. They painted mammoths and bison on cave walls, told stories of horned beasts and winged monsters, and passed down myths of creatures larger than life. In those legends, the giants remained alive in memory, even as the smaller survivors inherited the earth. The landscapes left behind by the extinctions were quieter, but not empty. They had been reshaped by those who endured, and now humanity itself would begin to remember and retell the story of giants, transforming bone and memory into myth. Even as the last giants vanished from the land, they did not disappear entirely. Their echoes lingered in memory, in story, in art etched on stone walls by firelight. Humans, who had once walked beside mammoths, hunted bison, and watched rhinoceroses sweep snow aside with their horns, carried the presence of these creatures into the only place extinction could not touch the imagination. From this spark, legends were born. In caves across Europe, paintings preserve visions of the Ice Age world. On walls deep within Lascaux in France, Chauvet in the Ardèche Valley, and Altamira in Spain, mammoths still march across stone. They are drawn with sweeping tusks, shaggy outlines, and herds that echo the real animals once seen by human eyes. Woolly rhinoceroses too appear, their horns exaggerated into sharp silhouettes, as though the artists wanted to capture not only what they saw, but the power these beasts carried. By the flicker of torchlight, these images came alive, shimmering with movement, linking memory to art in a way that outlasted both the hunters and the hunted. But the memory of giants did not stay only in paintings. It transformed into myths, reshaped by generations of retelling. The skulls of mammoths, with their single large opening in the center where the trunk once attached, may have inspired the first tales of Cyclops' one-eyed giants imagined by storytellers who stumbled upon ancient bones. The long horns of woolly rhinoceroses and Elasmotherium may have fed into the stories of unicorns, creatures of beauty and mystery that survived in legend long after the real animals were gone. To find a skull or horn eroding out of frozen ground was to encounter something both familiar and otherworldly, a reminder of a time when humans shared the world with beings that seemed larger than life. The myths of dragons may also trace their roots to these ancient discoveries. Fossilized bones of large animals, whether mammoths, mastodons, or giant reptiles, unearthed by early peoples, could easily be seen as the remains of fire-breathing monsters. Across Asia and Europe, stories of serpents and winged beasts grew, each one carrying an echo of real bones weathered by time. Even in places where people had never seen living megafauna, they still found their remains, and through imagination, they gave them new life. These legends became more than stories. They shaped culture, guiding belief systems, rituals, and art. Unicorns became symbols of purity in medieval Europe, dragons of power and danger in both Eastern and Western traditions. In Aboriginal rock art of Australia, massive figures painted on stone may reflect memories of marsupial lions and giant kangaroos, passed down in oral traditions long after the animals themselves were gone. In the Americas, carved stones and myths told of giant sloths and monstrous bears, their memory preserved in story even as the land changed. What is most striking is how often these myths connect to real creatures. They are not purely inventions of the mind, but transformations of memory, filtered through awe, fear, and reverence. For early humans, these animals were not distant curiosities, but central to survival. They were hunted, feared, admired, and remembered. When their bodies no longer roamed the plains, their images remained, preserved in caves and in mines, reshaped into dragons, unicorns, and beasts of story. In this way, the giants found immortality. Though extinction silenced their herds and roars, their presence survived in human culture, carried forward not by bone or blood, but by imagination. And while myths remembered them in symbolic form, the earth itself continued to carry forward their legacy in smaller ways, through the tiny survivors, rodents, bats, and birds that would quietly thrive as the great beasts faded into legend, while the memory of mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and rhinoceroses lived on in cave art and myth. The real inheritors of the earth were not the giants, but the small and often overlooked creatures that endured when others could not. Rodents, bats, and shrews, tiny compared to the titans of the Ice Age, became the quiet winners of deep time. Their survival was not spectacular or grand. It was subtle, persistent, and steady, and in that persistence, they reshaped the balance of life on Earth. Rodents are perhaps the most extraordinary example. Emerging long before the end of the Ice Age, they spread across nearly every environment, from forests to deserts to grasslands. Their teeth were the key to their success. Continuously growing incisors, sharp and ever-renewing, allowed them to gnaw through wood, seeds, and even the toughest plant material. When food was scarce, rodents could adapt their diets to survive. When climates shifted, they bred quickly, producing litters large enough to maintain populations in even the harshest conditions. In burrows beneath the snow, in nests tucked into trees, or hidden in fields, they endured while larger, slower breeding animals faded away. Bats tell another story of quiet triumph. Small, nocturnal, and often unseen, they took to the skies when daylight predators ruled the land. Their ability to fly set them apart from all other mammals, and echolocation gave them the power to navigate and hunt in darkness. While mammoths and bison thundered across the plains, bats darted silently through the night air, feeding on insects that might otherwise have overwhelmed ecosystems. Some species even adapted to fruit, pollen, and nectar, becoming critical pollinators and seed dispersers. In this way, bats wove themselves into the very fabric of forests and grasslands, helping plants spread and ecosystems regenerate. Their presence was quiet but essential, a reminder that survival does not always belong to the largest or strongest, but sometimes to the nimblest and most adaptable. Shrews, tiny and easily overlooked, carried forward yet another thread of survival. Their bodies were small, their metabolisms blazing fast, requiring them to eat nearly their weight in food each day. They fed on insects, worms, and other tiny prey, keeping populations of small creatures in check. In the vast chain of ecosystems, this role was vital. Without shrews and other insectivores, swarms of insects might have flourished unchecked, disturbing the delicate balances that sustained larger animals. Their sharp senses and constant foraging made them tiny regulators of life, shaping the environment in ways far greater than their size suggested. Being small was more than a trait. It was an advantage in a world of upheaval. When climates shifted, small animals could find refuge in cracks, burrows, or pockets of shelter that giants could not use. When food supplies dwindled, they needed far less to survive. Their breeding cycles were quick, allowing populations to rebound after disasters that might have wiped out larger creatures. They could adapt to niches as they opened, slipping into spaces that massive bodies and long lifespans could not. In their very smallness, they carried the resilience that giants lacked. The impact of these survivors is immense. Rodents became seed dispersers and prey for countless predators, sustaining food webs in ecosystems across the globe. Bats shaped forests through pollination and insect control, their wings spreading life as much as their flight carried them through the night. Shrews kept the smallest cycles of the food chain in balance, ensuring that the soil and undergrowth remained healthy. Together, these creatures created stability after the collapse of the Ice Age giants, holding ecosystems together in the wake of enormous change. Their story is not as dramatic as that of mammoths or saber-tooths, but it is more enduring. While the age of giants passed, the age of smallness persisted, quietly carrying the continuity of life through times of drought, ice, fire, and flood. It is because of them that many ecosystems today still function. And while humans remembered mammoths in art and wove unicorns from the bones of rhinoceroses, the real legacy of survival was carried forward by creatures so small that they could slip unnoticed through the cracks of history. As these tiny survivors multiplied and spread, the earth itself was shifting beneath their feet. Continents continued to drift, mountains rose, and oceans changed their currents. These forces, as powerful as any herd of mammoths, would shape the climates of the world and set the stage for the next great changes in life's story. While rodents burrowed into the soil, while bats darted across the night skies, and while shrews scurried through undergrowth, forces far greater than any creature were reshaping the earth beneath their feet. Continents never rest. They drift slowly across the surface of the planet, carried by tectonic plates that move at the speed of fingernails growing. Over millions of years, these small shifts add up to mountains rising, seas opening, and entire climates transforming. Life adapted to each change, yet many of the upheavals that defined the Cenozoic were written not in the choices of animals, but in the restless crust of the earth. One of the most dramatic changes came with the rise of the Himalayas. Around 50 million years ago, the continent of India, once an island adrift in the ocean, collided with the southern edge of Asia. The force of this impact folded rock upward, pushing stone upon stone until mountains soared higher than any that had come before. Even today, the Himalayas continue to rise, their jagged peaks reaching into the sky, shaped by the same collision that began so long ago. But the impact of these mountains was not limited to their height. They altered the very breath of the planet. The rise of the Himalayas changed global weather. Their towering walls blocked moist air from the oceans, creating monsoon cycles that drenched one side in rain while casting vast regions into arid deserts on the other. Dust blown from the Tibetan Plateau settled into distant lands, feeding soils with minerals and altering vegetation patterns far from the mountains themselves. The Himalayas acted like a great switch, turning winds and rains into new patterns, guiding the rhythm of seasons across Asia and beyond. At the same time, oceans shifted. Tectonic movements reshaped seaways, narrowing some and opening others, redirecting currents that carried heat around the globe. The closure of the seaway between North and South America, with the rise of the Isthmus of Panama about 3 million years ago, was one of the most significant of these changes. Warm waters that once flowed freely between the Atlantic and Pacific were forced northward, strengthening the Gulf Stream and carrying heat toward Europe. This redirection warmed some regions while cooling others, a shift that played a role in the onset of ice ages. Even earlier, the separation of South America from Antarctica isolated the southernmost continent, allowing a powerful circumpolar current to form around it. This current sealed Antarctica in cold, cutting it off from the warmer waters of the rest of the planet and allowing ice sheets to expand. Over millions of years, the interplay of drifting continents and swirling currents created cycles of warmth and ice, reshaping the habitats available to animals and plants. These great shifts in land and sea influenced not only temperatures, but also the pulse of evolution itself. As mountains rose and climates shifted, grasslands spread, giving rise to grazing animals and the predators that hunted them. As ice advanced and retreated, species were pushed into new ranges, tested by cold, and forced to adapt or vanish. The story of life in the Cenozoic was written as much by drifting stone as by flesh and bone. The ice ages themselves, those cycles of glaciers advancing and retreating, were tied to these oceanic and atmospheric changes. Currents carried heat differently, winds shifted, and ice grew thick across the poles. The advance of glaciers sculpted valleys and carved lakes, leaving behind landscapes still visible today. As the ice retreated, it released floods that reshaped rivers, spread fertile soils, and opened paths for plants and animals to recolonize. Each surge of ice and meltwater tested life, but each also created new opportunities, new niches to fill, and new stories to unfold. Through it all, the small survivors endured, carried forward by their adaptability, while larger animals rose and fell with the tides of change. Yet the restless continents and shifting seas were not finished. Even as they set the stage for ice ages, they prepared the ground for the Holocene, the brief warm period in which humans would rise fully into dominance. When the last ice age began to loosen its grip, glaciers retreated, seas rose, and climates softened into a warmth the Earth had not felt for many thousands of years. This new chapter, beginning about 11,700 years ago, is what scientists call the Holocene. It is the epoch we still live in, though its world is as different from the mammoth steppe as the mammoth steppe was from the age of dinosaurs. The giants were gone, their footsteps erased from plains and tundras, and in their place humanity rose, carrying with it the seeds of a new way of life. The Holocene was marked by stability, something rare in the story of Earth. Where Ice Age climates had lurched between cold and warmth in sudden swings, the Holocene brought seasons that repeated with relative predictability. Rainfall patterns steadied, summers and winters found balance, and ecosystems flourished under this new rhythm. Forests spread again into places once locked in ice, and rivers swelled with meltwater, carving fertile valleys. Grasslands turned green under steady rains, and coastlines stretched outward where glaciers had once pressed down on the land. For humans, this stability changed everything. No longer forced to move constantly in pursuit of herds or to adjust to sudden cold, groups began to settle. In river valleys of the Fertile Crescent, seeds that had once been gathered were now deliberately planted. Wheat and barley grew under human care, and animals like goats and sheep were domesticated, their wildness tempered into companionship and resource. Agriculture was born, and with it villages, then towns, then cities. Across the world, similar transformations unfolded. In China, millet and rice were cultivated, while in the Americas, maize, beans, and squash became staples. In Africa, sorghum and yams fed growing populations. Each region discovered its own partnership with plants and animals, reshaping landscapes into farmlands, pastures, and orchards. The steady warmth of the Holocene allowed harvests to be stored, surpluses to be traded, and communities to expand beyond the limits of immediate survival. Civilization rose on this foundation. The rivers of Mesopotamia, the Nile in Egypt, the Indus in South Asia, and the Yellow River in China became the cradles of early cities. Stone gave way to bronze, bronze to iron, and tools once used to hunt mammoths were now used to plow fields and raise monuments. Writing systems emerged to track harvests and laws, and stories of gods and heroes were told to explain the mysteries of life and death. Humanity became not just a species among many, but a force shaping the very surface of the planet. Yet this ascendance came in a world where the great beasts were absent. Mammoths no longer grazed the northern steppes, giant sloths no longer pulled down tree branches in the Americas, and diprotodons no longer browsed in the forests of Australia. The ecosystems humans inherited were quieter, smaller, shaped as much by absence as by presence. Elephants, rhinoceroses, and whales carried forward the memory of giants, but most of their kin were gone. Humanity rose in a landscape cleared of competitors, where adaptability and intelligence had outlasted size and strength. The Holocene was not only a story of agriculture and cities, but of spread. Humans crossed every continent, from the Arctic tundra to the Pacific Islands, from deserts to rainforests. With each migration, they adapted anew, building homes of snow in the north, terraced farms in mountains, and seafaring canoes to cross wide oceans. Where once survival had meant living beside giants, now survival meant shaping the land itself, cutting forests, irrigating fields, and domesticating landscapes as thoroughly as animals. But even as humans flourished, the Holocene was never entirely steady. Volcanic eruptions darkened skies, rivers flooded, and droughts struck. Civilizations rose and fell, some leaving only ruins and legends behind. Yet, through it all, the overarching warmth of this epoch allowed humanity to persist, to grow in numbers, and to weave culture, science, and art into its survival. The Holocene is our age, an interlude of warmth that gave us time to plant, build, and dream. But as it unfolded, the seeds of another transformation were already taking root, one driven not by tectonic plates or shifting seas, but by humanity itself. For the first time in Earth's history, a single species began to reshape the destiny of countless others, bringing extinctions and altering climates on a scale once reserved for asteroids and ice. The warmth of the Holocene allowed humanity to spread, to build farms and cities, to weave language and art into daily life. But in shaping the land to suit its needs, one species began to act as a force unlike any that had come before. Today, many scientists argue that we are no longer living in the Holocene at all, but in a new epoch shaped by human hands. They call it the Anthropocene, the age of humans, a chapter in which the balance of life is being altered not by asteroids or glaciers, but by us. The signs of this change can be read in the earth itself. In the soil and in the sediments of lakes lie traces of plastics, metals, and chemicals that never existed in nature until humans made them. In the atmosphere hangs carbon dioxide at levels higher than at any point in the last several million years, released from the burning of coal, oil, and gas. Rivers are dammed, forests cut down, oceans reshaped by fishing fleets and pollution. Species are disappearing not over millions of years, as in the slow rhythm of evolution, but in the span of centuries or even decades. Extinction rates are accelerating. Animals that once roamed in great herds or swam in vast schools are now dwindling. Amphibians, sensitive to changes in climate and water, are vanishing at alarming rates. Birds that once filled skies with migration now decline year by year, their habitats fragmented. Large mammals like elephants and rhinoceroses, echoes of the Ice Age giants, are threatened by poaching and shrinking land. Coral reefs, ancient architects of marine life, bleach and crumble as oceans warm and acidify. Each of these losses is part of a larger pattern, a wave of change that resembles, in speed and scale, the great collapses of the past. The parallels are unsettling. 66 million years ago, an asteroid struck and ended the reign of dinosaurs. During the Permian extinction, volcanic eruptions and climate upheaval wiped out most of life on Earth. In each case, rapid environmental stress overwhelmed species unable to adapt quickly enough. Today, the driver is not an asteroid or a surge of lava, but the combined weight of human activity. Forests are cleared faster than they can regrow. Carbon is released faster than ecosystems can absorb, and animals are hunted or displaced before they can recover. It is not a single event, but a relentless pressure, applied everywhere at once. The story of past extinctions shows that life always finds a way back, but it also shows how long recovery takes. After the asteroid at the end of the Cretaceous, it took millions of years before ecosystems regained their richness. After the Permian, tens of millions passed before life once again flourished in abundance. In the Anthropocene, the question is not only what will survive, but whether the pace of human change will allow time for recovery. And yet, within this sobering picture lies a difference. For the first time, the force driving extinction is aware of itself. Humans can measure the levels of carbon in the air, track the decline of species, and see the fingerprints of their own actions in melting glaciers and shrinking forests. Awareness brings a choice. While past extinction forces were blind, this one carries the possibility of foresight. The question that hangs over the Anthropocene is whether awareness will be enough to alter the course, or whether humanity will continue to push forward, reshaping the Earth into a quieter place with fewer voices in its chorus of life. The giants are gone, the Ice Age herds are no more, but the pattern continues. Just as climate and catastrophe once silenced the mammoths, so too may human hands silence the living echoes that remain. And as this new epoch unfolds, it draws us closer to a reflection. If we are the new extinction force, what will the Earth look like when the story of our age is written into stone? We live in the shadow of giants we have mostly forgotten. The Earth we walk today was not built in silence, but in the echoes of footsteps larger than ours, in the beating wings of birds taller than men, in the deep calls of whales whose ancestors once strode on land. The Cenozoic was their age before it became ours, a stage where life experimented with forms stranger and more magnificent than imagination alone could conjure. For 66 million years this age unfolded, carrying the Earth from the ashes of an asteroid's fire to the cities, fields, and oceans we know today. The legacy of that age is everywhere around us. Elephants carry the memory of mammoths in the swing of their trunks and the wisdom of their herds. Rhinoceroses, though fewer in number, still trace their line back to woolly cousins and horned titans that once roamed Eurasia. Whales dive in oceans, the largest animals to ever live, their voices vibrating across miles of water, reminders that once a creature with hooves stepped into rivers and began a journey into the sea. Even the smallest survivors, the mice, the bats, the shrews, live as proof that endurance is not always about size, but about resilience, flexibility, and persistence. And woven among them all is humanity, a species born from this age, not apart from it, shaped by the same winds, the same shifting continents, the same tests of survival. When we look back at the Cenozoic, we see not only the drama of extinction, but also the persistence of life. After fire and ash silenced the dinosaurs, tiny mammals crept from burrows. They grew, they adapted, they rose into forms so varied that they filled every empty niche. They became hunters with teeth like knives, grazers that moved in herds across spreading grasslands, and gentle giants that towered like living skyscrapers. The story of the Cenozoic is not only about loss, but about renewal, about the endless creativity of evolution, and the resilience that carried life forward when so much had been erased. And within this grand story, humanity arrived late, but not unnoticed. We walked into landscapes still vibrant with mammoths, giant kangaroos, and saber-toothed cats. We painted them on cave walls, hunted them, feared them, and eventually watched as many slipped away forever. Now, in our own age, we are faced with the responsibility of remembering that we are not outside this story. We are part of it. The same Earth that carried terror birds and mastodons carries us, and the choices we make ripple outward, shaping the lives of countless other species. To live in the shadow of giants is to carry their memory. Their bones rest beneath our feet, their images survive in our myths, and their legacy lives in the animals still among us. The Cenozoic gave us not only whales and elephants, but also ourselves. It gave us the chance to walk upright, to think, to imagine, and to tell stories that stretch from the silence after an asteroid strike to the lights of modern cities. This journey through forgotten ages is more than history. It is a reminder that life has always been fragile, yet astonishingly persistent, that the world has been remade before and will be remade again, and that we, like the survivors who came before us, are threads in a much larger tapestry, one woven by time, chance, and resilience. If you've found calm in this journey through deep time, it would mean a great deal if you gave this video a gentle like and perhaps subscribed, so you can join me on more wanderings through Earth's mysteries. And if you feel like sharing, let me know in the comments where are you listening from tonight and what time is it there. I always love seeing how these quiet stories travel across the world, one dreamer at a time. So now, let the story of the giants linger in your thoughts, soft as an echo carried on the wind. The Earth has been many worlds before ours, and it will be many more after. And in the quiet of this moment, we stand within that story, the latest chapter in an age of wonder,